in the committee of the whole meeting of Tuesday, January 17th, and we're meeting today on the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. Council has an agenda in front of them. I did want to add, right at the end of the agenda, an item about budget and utilities, if that's all right, just the Director of Finance is going to come in and give us a bit of an update. And if Council's okay with that amended agenda, I'll move for a motion to approve. Moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Kent. All those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. First up, we have delegations, and our first delegation is the Squamish Montessori School regarding their lease. Councillor Elliott?
Yeah, I'm going to recuse myself from this presentation and conversation. My children go to the school, and my husband sits on the board.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Neil, do you want to preface this, or should
Yeah,
we just
sure.
go right
Sounds
to
good. Thank you, Mayor and Council. Neil Plumb, Real Estate Manager. The Montessori lease is up for renewal, up for discussion, and prior to Council considering how to move forward with that, we thought it was appropriate for them to come in and make a presentation and enlighten us on what their future plans are. There's some moves afoot there potentially for the organization, so we wanted Council to be aware of where that's at. So I'll turn it over to Corey.
Great, welcome.
Good afternoon, Mayor, Council. As you've heard, we're here on behalf of Squamish Montessori School Limited, as well as the Squamish Montessori Society. We collectively run what is known as Squamish Montessori, which is a school on Loggers Lane at 42,000 Loggers Lane.
Perhaps you could just introduce yourself, just so everybody knows.
My name is Corey Steinberg, and as said, I'm here for Squamish Montessori Society and Squamish Montessori Limited. We have a presentation that's being queued up, I understand right now, as a PowerPoint. Just wait a moment while that happens. But while we do, we can actually begin, because our first slide, now before you, talks about who we are. So we're located at 42,000 Loggers Lane right now, and that's what brings us here today.
You're doing a great job of sort of just going,
Yeah.
there we go.
There's essentially two of us there. And as you can see on the first slide, one is Squamish Montessori School, one is the Squamish Montessori Society. If we could please go to the second slide, I'll explain how this has developed over time. In 2008, Squamish Montessori School Limited had 3 students. They topped out in 2016, at the beginning of the year, with 52 students. In 2010, the society was created. There were 7 students. They now host 78 students. Now, why are there 2 different sections? Well, Squamish Montessori School Limited essentially runs a daycare, children 2.5 to 5 years old. The rest of the children are under the Squamish Montessori Society. Collectively, they're all together in a school run according to the Montessori system, which you may or may not be familiar with, which is an alternative type of system to the usual mainstream. So in partnership, we collectively run the Squamish Montessori School. If we can just go to the next slide, please. Here's a picture of some of our students, some of our staff, and as you can see, from its modest beginnings of 3 students, we have quite a complement of people now. You can see, just a little explanation for some of the terminology here. On the top left, you'll see the word CASA. CASA is essentially the Montessori term for the daycare. It houses the 2.5 to 5-year-olds. We then have 2 groups of 3 grades. It doesn't go in the usual grading system. So from grades 1 to 3 is lower elementary, or lower L. And then you'll notice the upper L, grades 4 to 6. So overall, we're running a school and a daycare that has coverage for people from 7 o'clock in the morning till 6 o'clock at night for children aged 2.5 up to the end of grade 6. To give you an idea of where we are right now, that's us on Loggers Lane, bird's eye view. If you look on the left, that's Loggers Lane. On the north, you'll see Centennial Way. You can picture Brendan Park is across the road further to the left. We've included a little information just to give an idea of where we are and why it's a little bit overcrowded. You can see the red space, which is ours. We only have half of that building and some external space. The daycare and kindergarten children, there's 41 of them, are in the front of the building. Behind them, we have the oldest children, grades 4 to 6, and there's 27 in there. We were already somewhat bursting at the seams, so you can see it says school, grades 1 to 3, who are housed in 2 portables. So that's 2 separate lower L classes, 41 students. And if you look down at the bottom right, there are some children who look like they did not make it into the main campus, and that's another daycare facility at Valleycliff. And that's just one indicator. We were already running out of space. We now host 11 children at essentially a home daycare that's been refitted, and it's actually a very, very nice daycare for the Montessori system, but they also feed into the Squamish Montessori School. A little bit about us. There's something called the Association Montessori Internationale. We're a member of it, and in fact, we are the second largest in British Columbia. We're not a private school in the sense that some people might think of. We're a provincially funded independent school. So in fact, about half of our funding comes from the province. We don't present ourselves as an exclusive school. In fact, we want it to be quite inclusive. Take children of all different types and stripes and ones who have different needs. And which brings us to the next bullet, that we are a valuable alternative to the other schools in town. The Waldorf has a different system. There's the regular schools, the elementaries, French school. Well, ours is the one Montessori. Purely from a business perspective, we're a very reliable tenant. We've been a good tenant for years. We pay our bills. We have good revenue, and we'll get to that in a moment. Not only are we a reliable tenant, but we're a tenant that, in our view, contributes positively to the community. We're giving quality care and schooling to young children. We're supporting families, which I think you'll know there's many young families in Squamish. We'll be getting to those details in a moment. And we're very stable. We're growing. We're only getting bigger. Now, the economic value of this. We have about $1 million in revenue. With that, we support 14 full-time employees, 18 in total, and in fact, for the next school year, we're looking at about 25. Now, having our employees stay in town has a considerable value to Squamish. I mean, not only are these people that are not commuting to another locale and essentially risking their health on the highway, but people who commute elsewhere have a tendency to spend their wages elsewhere. They shop there, they make their appointments there. These are 18 people we're keeping in town. And in fact, you'll see we bring in other monies. We get $330,000 in grants. We've got another extra grant of $429,000. So we tend to attract other people, other qualified early childhood educators, and other, various types. It's all the type of thing that's really contributing to the fabric of Squamish. So these are some statistics. I don't see the value in going through all these right now, other than to say, bursting at the seams. I can take you to a few things here. We have waitlisted children. People cannot wait to get into our school. We can fill our school. We can overfill our school. And that's what brings us to where our problem is, that in fact we now had to come up with a contingency plan of, as we see here, going forward. I like the timing of the changing of that slide. Yeah, that's perfect. A good catharsis there. See, we need something to go forward. So we had to come up with a plan. In 2016, 130 students in that space, and some in Valleycliff. So 2018 and 2019, we are projecting 185, perhaps more than 185 students. With that, we've had to come up with some sort of solution, and we somehow managed to figure out how to build ourselves a school. When I put it that way, it was a long road. It took some creativity. It took a lot of work from the school. But we've done it. We are planning to move to the new Skyridge development, which council will be well familiar with. Now, this is a bit of a long-range plan, because all the creativity that went into building this was predicated on having a certain amount of stability. And that stability starts with where we are. At the forestry building, we knew or believed we could count upon there being a number of children who are being filtered both from Valleycliff and the forestry building through that facility and ultimately ending up in our other school. We're planning to move over about 63, perhaps more students from that facility, and we're going to add another 50 daycare spaces at the new facility. But the plan was to add new daycare facilities. We're planning to keep the old ones, we're planning to keep the Valleycliff ones, and this altogether supports our strategy of always having a filter and feeder of students that come straight into our new school, therefore being able to make good on the plan that I mentioned earlier of how we managed to finance our new school with some great creativity. It all works together, it's all our strategy, and overall, as you can see, what's happening here is our little school that started with 3 students. Well, now we're bursting at the seams. We've caused there to be created another daycare facility, and we're now building a whole other school. Apart from this, there's been other spin-off because we've attracted some talent. They've opened other businesses in town that are related. It's a burgeoning industry, and that is our plan for the future. However, as you'll recall, we are here because our lease is up. And our concern is that we will not be able to enter into a new lease at Loggers Lane. And if that happens, that definitely throws a bit of a wrench into some of our plans for the future and how we're going to support the new school. It impacts everything. So, current slide, the ask. What are we asking? Quite simply, we're asking council to kindly enter into negotiations with us to renew the lease for both Squamish Montessori Society and Squamish Montessori School Limited for our half of the forestry building for an additional 5 years. Why? Why would we like that? To ensure some continuation of care and assure some stability for over about 120 families beyond next year. There's 130 children, it works out to about 120 families. Now, our rationale. Why should we get this? Well, first point, I've sort of alluded to it, it provides confidence and stability for families in Squamish. Not only for families in Squamish, but perhaps families considering Squamish. And generally speaking, in our experience, these families are looking for stability for childcare for a 3 to 4 year time frame. 2018 is coming pretty soon. The building itself, well, for us, it offers a unique opportunity. It's really just not elsewhere in Squamish. For that reason, we put very significant investment into the building. You can see, just from the map that I showed you, we added some portables, but the building itself, it had to be fitted specific for the Montessori system, which requires a lot of space, lots of room for the children to move around, lots of open space. We did that in the school. We've added other buildings. We keep the grounds meticulous. We have children there every day. We also have our customers, the parents, coming in every day. So we're pretty motivated to be a very good tenant to keep things in tip-top shape. Quite frankly, our parents actually pitch in. They've done a lot of the renovations ourselves. We get a lot of in-kind work. That our property has only improved in the time that we've been there. And finally, the final rationale you see on that slide is that this is actually congruent with the District of Squamish's own policy as it's stated in the Parks and Recreation Master Plan. And if you skip to our next slide, you can see here. In the 2012 District of Squamish Parks and Recreation Master Plan, and I'm going to just read directly from it, recommendations. When vacancy allows, implement a family and children's services center phasing in programming such as a family drop-in and preschool/childcare, along with expanded outside play spaces. This scenario would provide expanded service for preschoolers and their families, a significant demographic in Squamish, and will free up space in the Brennan Park Rec Center for additional programming. To state the obvious, we meet a lot of these criteria. We're right there, we've done this, we've put the investment in, we'd like to do it more. District zoning bylaw update, 2016. Squamish is attracting many young families and is statistically one of the youngest towns in BC. As a result, we are experiencing a shortage of childcare spaces. If current demographic and population growth trends continue, Squamish will likely continue to experience a significant shortage of childcare facilities. Again, that's us. We meet this. If we are unable to have stability and we're unable to continue in Loggers Lane, It could have a bit of a domino effect. It's going to be a bit of a problem for us, and potentially it's going to detract from what the policy of Squamish is looking at going forward. This, district supporting data and reports. I don't plan to go through this in detail. This is essentially a number of statistics that go to show that, in fact, bottom line, early development indicators, what children need to develop over time. Reports have shown that statistically, how children develop early on makes a big difference to how they progress in the future. And right now, we have a report that says we have a statistically relevant increase in vulnerability both in Squamish South and Squamish North, reflecting a need for high-quality preschool care. At least in our opinion, we offer very high-quality preschool care, and it's been our experience that a number of students have come to us that didn't necessarily fit in other places and are thriving. So, we meet this. We think that working with us is only good for Squamish. Policy rationale. Well, we've talked about the growing population of young families, young children in Squamish. Existing district policy is to encourage the development of preschool and daycare facilities, as well as new emerging childcare policy directions. As well, this is recognition of recent council declaration that health, safety, and well-being of children is foundational to the community, and early childhood and family-focused lens be put on the policy, bylaws, and built environment and strategic planning. This was October 27, 2015. We also think, it's an important point, that lack of affordable housing and childcare options challenge livability for families anywhere, including in Squamish. Squamish has very limited land. You can't just move to the other neighborhood. There's only a few of them. You can't just go elsewhere for childcare because it's north or south. And there's concern for early childhood vulnerabilities, which are identified in the Squamish Early Development Instrument, which is the UBC Human Early Learning Partnership. And we think that we do go a distance to addressing these things. Help kids when they're younger to flourish when they're older. This is a slide, again, that I'm not going to go through in any great detail. These are some statistics. If council would like to take a look at it any other time, it's really just showing we're a young population. It's getting younger.
We're making babies.
And attracting them. People are coming here with babies. Now, whether or not we necessarily follow what other municipalities do, we can certainly benefit if we look sometimes at the money other municipalities have spent on reviewing this issue. And what we found is one of the leaders in this area was New Westminster, who studied it at quite a level. And we've only highlighted a couple of the needs that were assessed and highlighted by New West. But the first bulleted point, high level of child care operators reported that their tenure arrangements are insecure, or relatively insecure, and that equal efforts should be made to stabilize existing spaces while creating new ones to make meaningful gains. We think we're analogous, and we can speak from experience. We are those people, and we're looking for stability. Bullet number 2, the need to inventory municipally owned buildings, such as Launders Lane, for suitability to house childcare facilities, and that any new municipal facility development or significant renovations to existing should include provision of childcare facilities. Again, that's not our town. We think it's a sound policy, though. The City of Vancouver itself, for Vancouver's Healthy City Strategy, identifies access to quality, affordable, licensed childcare as a core indicator relating to that city's targets to provide children with the best start. As said, we provide very high quality care. We have early childhood educators. We've actually created more practicums that have caused other people to graduate in this. People have moved here for us. We address that need. So really, in summary, we're a good tenant. We have pretty good revenue. We're stable. We've always paid our bills. We're designed in such a way that our revenue essentially stays in Squamish. We've shown that we've caused a spin-off that's created other businesses, other schools. Policies, both ours and those who studied it, have shown that people who do the work that we do can only do it better if we have stability. again, providing stability to us, actually works with Squamish's own policies as they've been set out. So with that, we're just here today asking that you kindly enter into negotiations with us to allow us to renew our lease at Loggers Lane for 5 years. And subject to any questions, that's all I have to say today.
Thank you very much, Corey. I have Councillor Race had his hand up. Anyone else at this point? Go ahead.
Thank you. I just, maybe I missed it in the presentation, but is the long-term intent to be at both this location and the Skyridge location?
It is.
Not just for 5 years, but perhaps even beyond that?
Definitely. From what we've studied and what we can see, we have unborn children on our list right now, 3 of them actually.
Yeah, I saw that.
Yes. We have no reason to believe this is going to slow down. And when we move our students from the old school, one point that was glossed over, the new school is going to be open September of 2018. But we're being told that's a very aggressive date, and we shouldn't count on it. And anyone who's done a renovation or built something from the ground up knows if you're told not to count on it, probably don't count on it. We're not counting on it. And we were hoping to keep all of our kids in the original location, move them over as soon as we can. At that point, we are easily able to fill that school with more daycare children, just expanding. And I mean, our waiting list will eventually be completed. We'll all moved in our school. We'll probably have more on the waiting list by then. Our plan is to do this over the long term and in a big way.
Councillor Barkemore?
Excuse me for being a few minutes late on the presentation, but I'm just wondering, so is it a complete trajectory? So if a kid is in childcare, the assumption is that they're going to be going into the school afterwards, once they become school age, or is it somewhat independent?
Certainly it's their choice,
Yeah.
and it's not our assumption at all. In fact, we don't. If every single one of the children were to stay all the way through, we would have to expand yet again, and that isn't really what happens. But we get a considerable number of them, so that's why we have all these different feeders. The smallest being Ballycliffe, the biggest being Loggers Lane, and we're going to have more, in fact, at our new school. With all of these, this should always be able to feed our lower L and upper L, so that they're always fast.
Thank you. Any other questions? Thank you very much, Corey. So just quickly over to Neil. Is this going to come to council in the near future?
Yep, it
for
will.
consideration?
Yep, because this is something that we've been wanting to get to for a little while now. So they've been operating on a month-to-month lease since their lease expired last fall.
Okay.
So it's something that we'll move fairly quickly on.
Great.
Okay.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for your time today.
And someone, did you have another question?
Well, just a question, were you looking for a resolution or
There
a
wasn't
direction
one
to
in the-
negotiate, or?
No, I think that based on, if council is, a sense I'm getting is council is prepared to have a report from staff come forward on this basis, so we'll deal with it at that point in time. Yeah.
Okay.
Thank you. Can someone get Councillor Elliott, please?
Yeah. Cool.
So next on our agenda is 3-2 bike park proposal, and we have Ron Goldstone as our delegate, so just have a seat at the table.
Yeah, absolutely.
Let's have one
Thank
of
you
the
very much.
acoustic mufflers. Otherwise,
There you go.
Whenever you're ready.
All right, so I'll just give a quick introduction then as well. Thank you, Mayor and Council. This is Ron Goldstone, a member of the community here, and he has approached district staff about the possibility of building a dirt jump pump track in the district land over behind and below the Alex Monroe Fire Hall. So before staff got too far into the process, we wanted to bring it to council and see what council's appetite was for moving forward here.
Awesome. Welcome.
that was pretty much my presentation.
Oh,
Okay.
sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, do it.
Okay. Yeah, thanks, Mayor and Council. Like Neil said, my name's Ron Goldstone. I've been a Squamish resident for over 20 years and avid mountain biker for most of that time. And what I'm bringing you today is a proposal for a mountain bike park, as Neil said. The ask here is that we have permission from council to pursue the project, and that the district staff have authorization or approval from council to help me facilitate this project. The project's to build a dirt jump park, or actually what the better term I think is being adopted is called a bicycle playground. And that's going to be located on district land at 37890 Clark Drive in Valleycliff, which is shown here. This is the Chances Casino is in the bottom left-hand corner. The district fire hall is up on the hill, and Squamish Elementary is up on the hill to the north, or the site location there. I'm proposing using the land which is underneath the BC Hydro power lines in a linear fashion from north to south there. There's already existing access from an old road in the northeast corner, and potential access from the southwest corner as well. I'm not going to go through all through these, but this project is supported by district policy in the community plan and the Trails Master Plan. And specifically in the Parks and Rec Master Plan, there's specific recommendations to consider new parks in the southern part of Valleycliff, and parks that are a little bit more geared towards teenagers who are often, kind of in that zone where they're too young for children's playgrounds and too old for things that adults do. So, we've shown that the district supported Brennan Park bicycle playground has been very successful, and my plan here is that we need the next progression up. And the reason we need the next progression up is that we need to help the Squamish BMX Club, the high school mountain bike academy, and also just trying to get some facilities for those teenagers to get involved in outdoor mountain biking without sort of committing to having expensive mountain bikes. Dirt jumps are often used from kids because they're not as expensive, and they don't take the commitment of mountain bikes. This is also the location. It's along the corridor trail and the Valleycliff Dike Trail, so even though it's outside of like downtown core, it's still pretty accessible, and we think that the site is good for those two reasons. Plus, the main point is that it actually has a bit of a slope to it. The problem with the Brennan Park one, if we were to build there, we'd have to import a lot of fill, which becomes very expensive. The site's, like I said, is in a disturbed area. It's in keeping with BC Hydro's policies. We've talked to them, and they don't see a concern with it. It's close to neighborhoods, but it's not directly impacting neighborhoods. So there are residences nearby. The reserve is right there, which I think is going to be a positive asset. And also it has facilities like water is nearby. We need water for maintaining the jumps. We'll have washrooms available either through Chances or through the gas station. And it's also close to the hospital, which is a nice feature. Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why I'm here, is because the kids are out there building jumps, and they're building far in the forest, and they're hard to. There's no emergency services, right? So I think that this would be a good asset by having this location close there. And also, from a user point of view, it's protected from the wind, which is obviously a challenge here in Squamish, and it's not being used for anything else. That land is really limited in its use. So, the funding of this. Conservatively, we're anticipating this will be about a $75,000 project. It's going to depend on what requirements we get into as we go forward and sign a lease agreement with the district, but this is something that we're keeping at a very small scale. There are a number of other municipal bicycle playgrounds. One of them is being built in Nanaimo right now for a $450,000 budget. We're not suggesting anything's going to be that grandiose. The main reason that I'm here with you today is that this project is going to be funded by volunteers and in-kind work, and we've talked to some of the local bike park builders and trail builders, and Dream Wizards is probably one of the most famous ones that we have, and they've committed to volunteering their time and equipment to build this park for us. As part of this project, I'm really expecting that this will be something that's going to be embraced by kids, and the kids will want to come along and create an ownership of the park for themselves, get involved in the planning and construction and design. We are going to have to need a little bit of money, depending again on what the requirements for signage is, fencing, all these other features. And we have some ideas about how to fundraise for that. The long-term maintenance of this, we will be working with SORCA as they will be the leaseholder, and we're going to create a subcommittee specifically designed for the management of the bike park, the bicycle playground. And so what I'm asking from the district is that we'll provide a garbage can, but I'd like the district to budget for garbage removal services from this part. We'd like the district to help us tie into the water system. As with the other bike park, bike playground, the district covers the SORCA's increased insurance costs. And I'm hoping that I'll be here next year with the problem of this being too busy and we need to expand. And at that point, I hope that maybe next year I'll be asking for the district to help me out and expand the project. So our timing, we want to move on this right away. Ideally, we're going to try and have this thing open for this summer, May 24th. We have a bit more work to do, but really we're at the point right now we need just approval from district, from council that we're on the right track and that you support the staff helping me out to complete this.
Thanks a lot. Quick question to staff, perhaps. It's zone P2. Would it need a rezoning?
No.
It qualifies under community activity center, or as long as it.
Yeah, that's our interpretation. No rezoning.
Okay, great. I have Peter and then Suji.
Just a couple questions, probably one to staff. What like the cost be to connect that to our infrastructure for water to get out there?
Gary, we.
I don't know, I was just looking, there's a hydrant right behind the fire hall, but then we've got a trench from that. It's...
Can I answer that?
Sure.
There's a hydrant in behind the casino down at the bottom, and all we would want to do is just the connection. We'd be responsible for the trenching and the installation of the faucets and the rest of it. We just don't want to be touching the district water mains.
Yeah, the hydrant on the casino property would belong to the casino. It's not one of ours, not according to...
Yeah,
But
we
we
can
can
explore that further
explore
and
that further, yeah.
see what's necessary. Yeah.
Just one other thing, have you considered parking? Because I know there's the road that runs along in the back there, but if you have some substantial use of the space, where would you put cars?
So there is, on that access road that's on the northwest, there'll be space there for half a dozen cars. I'd like to work it with the casino to use some of their parking because we would be off times with them. But in the short term, if we are successful, I think that the parking that we can create in that access will be sufficient.
Great, thank you. Yeah.
Thanks, Ron. I think this is an absolutely fabulous use of this land, and I really appreciate that you thought through all the future charges and expecting, that it will require community grants, and I'm totally in support of that.
Question?
I don't have any questions. I think, I guess the DCC charges, I see this as a DCC eligible project. I'm not sure as far as water connections. And maybe we can look at this as,
It's not in our
a
bylaw.
community or a community amenity contribution. I'm wondering if we can grab money instead of from regular taxation to do the connection, is look at either DCCs or community amenity contributions, as this is exactly a community amenity for youth in that age demographic is highly necessary. I like the location by the hospital.
Yeah, well, I think we can look at funding sources for sure. It's not currently in our DCC bylaw, so we have to amend our bylaw to include it, but
Yeah.
I think there's other sources that we can dig into to see if we can fund it. Anybody else have any questions for the proponent? Any comments? Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
Well, just to say I agree. I think it's a great initiative, and getting kids outside exercising, is not too much wrong with that. So happy to help support this in any way we can.
Yeah, ditto. I think using these areas under hydro cuts that just otherwise are essentially sterile from use for something like this is you see them in other communities, so it's great that this is coming forward. So just looking from a staff's point of view, a motion of support to proceed, and is that enough for now? And
Yeah.
explore options for funding the water connection?
Yeah, and I'll just, for what it's worth, the in terms of the schedule, we would come back to council with a license slash lease agreement to, similar to this type of thing we use with the skills park at Brennan Park. So we have a bit of a template there, which when I saw February 2017, I was a little nervous whether we can hit that deadline, but the good news is we do have a template to work from, so hopefully that'll help speed things up.
Moved by Councillor Ray, second by Councillor Chappelle, that council support this project and bring back a lease agreement for consideration. Sound good?
Sounds great.
License, it says lease up
License.
there, that's why it said.
It'd be a
It
license.
should be a
Lease
license.
slash license.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll figure it out.
And that funding options also be brought back to help support infrastructure plans.
Okay.
I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. And just the work that citizens put in and bringing these initiatives forward is invaluable. I want to thank you very much
Thank you, Ted.
for your work.
Yeah,
Thanks, Ted.
it doesn't happen.
We'll all be out there.
Okay, moving on, in the agenda, we have Mashiter feasibility study.
Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. My name is David Roulston. I'm a municipal engineer with the District of Squamish. I'm here today to talk about a feasibility study that the district has recently completed, evaluating the potential for the district to build a small-scale run-of-river power project on Mashiter Creek. Some quick background on the project is that a preliminary business plan was prepared in January of 2016 that identified the potential of using existing water infrastructure to build a new run-of-river hydroelectric project. That business plan was presented to council in March, along with a recommendation to complete a feasibility study to assess the potential of the project in more detail. And that work was started in May by Impulse Development Limited, and a final report was submitted to the district in November of 2016. So the intent for today is to discuss the findings of that feasibility study. So a quick overview of the feasibility. The scope of the study was first to review the energy market and to determine BC Hydro's willingness to purchase power from the district and the anticipated terms of that agreement. To also complete a hydrologic resource assessment to determine how much water is in the creek and how that's distributed throughout the year, so we can determine how much water could potentially be diverted from the creek for producing power. 5 different project options they came up with 5 different project options and completed an evaluation for each option. So reviewing what are the infrastructure and environmental impacts, preparing cost estimates for each option, and also assessing the potential revenues to determine the financial viability. And finally, they used all of that information to make recommendations on the project. So I mentioned there's 5 options that were evaluated. All of the options use the existing water intake that we have on Mashiter Creek and the pipeline. Both of those are used as a backup water supply for the district. Option 1 would install a powerhouse close to the Mashiter Trail, about a kilometer north of Thunderbird Ridge, and it would divert water to the west, so actually flowing through Brackendale and out of Mashiter Creek. The benefits of this option are that no pipeline work would be required, but it would permanently divert water out of the creek, so it would have the largest environmental impacts of the options. Option 2 is slightly east of option 1, but it would divert water back into Mashiter Creek. Options 1 and 2 are the lowest elevation of the options, and that means they can produce the most energy and also generate the most revenue than the next options that are located at higher elevations. So both of those options would connect power to the BC Hydro grid with transmission lines running from the powerhouse to the top of Thunderbird Ridge, tying into the grid at the top of the ridge. Option 3 would be located just north of the pipe bridge on the Mashiter Trail, and instead of tying the transmission lines in at Thunderbird Ridge, they would cross Mashiter Creek to the east and underhang the power lines for the Skookum Run-of-River hydro towers, so it would connect in with power at Quest University. This option wouldn't generate as much power because it is at a higher elevation than options 1 and 2. And then the last option, option 4, is the furthest north of the options, so it has the least elevation drop and also the lowest power production and revenue. It would also tie in power at the Quest University. And a modified version of option 4A was also considered that would use the same powerhouse location, but it would actually twin the pipeline, so it would pass a higher volume of water. And in order to do that, upgrades would be required to the existing water intake. So this is the most expensive, but also would produce the most power of the options. Impulse completed a financial analysis evaluating the overall project costs and comparing that with estimated revenues to determine if the projects could produce a positive cash flow. So I'll quickly go over those numbers. Options 1 to 4 all have similar construction costs, ranging from $1.5 to $1.8 million, whereas option 4A has a significantly higher construction cost, about $4.5 million, with it required to build a new pipeline and upgrade the water intake. A net present value analysis was also completed for annual revenues from selling power and determining operating expenditures to operate and maintain the facilities. And based on those 2 items, the net revenue that the projects could receive. So in terms of annual revenues, between options 1 and 4, option 2 has the highest revenue, with it being at the lowest elevation. Option 4A has a significantly higher revenue, with it diverting more water from the creek and producing more power. So it also has the highest revenue by a significant margin. The operating expenditures are all very similar for options 1 to 4, whereas option 4A is about $1 million higher than that, just with there being more infrastructure to maintain. So based on that, the net revenue for each project was tallied. Options 1, 2, and 4A each produced a positive net revenue. And finally, the net revenue was compared with the initial construction costs to determine if the revenue to cost ratio, or in other words, if the project can actually produce a positive cash flow, taking all things into account. So of the options, only options 2 and 4 had a marginally positive revenue to cost ratio, and that's using a 40-year term. So of these 2 options, option 2 is preferred because it has a significantly lower construction costs. It makes the best use of existing infrastructure, and it has the lowest environmental impacts because it would be diverting less water from Mashiter Creek. There are a number of challenges and risks and uncertainties. First and foremost is the uncertainty of BC Hydro actually entering into a purchase agreement with the district. In order to determine an answer to that, we would actually need to complete environmental studies and amend our water license to allow it to be expanded from just domestic water consumption to power production. So it's estimated that it would take about $200,000 to actually get to a position where we could submit an application. And the risk is that we could spend that money and then BC Hydro may not agree to purchase the power. There are also some cost uncertainties. So this feasibility study is preliminary. It's possible that capital or operating costs could increase with detailed engineering. Land costs are also a significant unknown. And with the slim margins, financial margins, it could turn the project from a cash flow positive to a cash flow negative if those costs increase. There's also uncertainty about whether water licensing would be forthcoming. So the environmental impacts are estimated to be pretty small, but there's still some uncertainty as to whether the province would actually grant a revised water license. And then there's some other challenges. So sediment challenges, it's a very dynamic creek. There would be a need for ongoing clean out of the water intake, and so the cost could escalate if there is an unforeseen event. There would be significant staff time and resources to actually develop the project and get it to operating. And then there's low greenhouse gas reduction compared with other initiatives, just because it would be replacing hydroelectric power with a different form of hydroelectric power. There's also some opportunities and benefits. So if the district could receive grant funding to subsidize construction costs, that could change the project from being a marginal project to actually being a significantly positive cash flow. Again, the challenges with that is that we would need to complete environmental study and expend some significant funds just to get into a position of actually applying for grants. And also that it would likely displace another grant opportunity on critical infrastructure like our sewer or water systems. There's also the opportunity that it could be a demonstration project, so it could be used for educational opportunities. We could do tours with local schools. There could also be signage in place to educate the community. So there's a lot of cool things that could be done with the project, just in terms of community outreach and it being a demonstration project. So conclusions are that the project is feasible, but it's a marginal project. It requires a long payback period. There are some significant cost uncertainties on construction, land acquisition, and operating costs. And if those costs rose, then it could change the cash flow from positive to negative. There's also significant costs just to get to a point of actually submitting an application to BC Hydro and confirming what the terms of that agreement would be. Significant staff time, as I mentioned, and low greenhouse gas reduction. So given these marginal benefits and the significant risks and uncertainties, at this point it is recommended to not pursue the project any further. But having said that, because it was such a marginal point, we needed to actually do our due diligence and complete the feasibility study in order to determine these numbers. So staff do feel that the feasibility study was a worthwhile pursuit, and we're now in a position to make an informed decision. So that's it for my presentation.
Thank you. Council, are there any questions? Councillor Raising.
Thank you. Do you know, is there an industry standard for what the return might be expected for an IPP? I mean, we're talking about 114 to 124, or 118 to 124, I think.
Right.
Where does the industry sort of fall on that?
Through the mayor, I don't have a specific number, but discussing that with Impulse, they indicated to me that a private proponent would not be likely to pursue a project with that kind of slim margin with the risks and uncertainties. I think it would have to be substantially higher for a private company to entertain that kind of a project.
Councillor Blackman-Moore and Councillor Kent.
So just to try and understand a order of magnitude here. So of the four potential arrangements, the biggest one was a 581 kilowatt hour capacity. How many homes around would that supply? I'm just trying to understand what the significance of that is.
Mm-hmm. Good question. I don't actually have an answer off the top of my head for you.
Any other questions? Councillor Blackman-Moore for this time?
Sure.
Councillor Kent.
Yeah, thanks, David, for your work on following up on this and just looking at your recommendation and looking at some of the bullet points like the no guarantee of sales to hydro, investment and the increased costs and what's required to even actually just kick it off a little bit further to do the studies. maintenance, staff time, and unlikely return on any investment until 2040. I think your recommendation is well taken.
Thank you.
Thanks. Looking at the recommendation as well, I look at any power project as a long-term investment. You're never going to make your money back immediately, and I would agree with your assessment that if we could get grants to support this, that we should just really continue along the path of trying to mitigate some of the, can you go back to the slide actually?
Sure.
That's good enough.
Okay.
So Louis, the reduction in the GHG, you're increasing your hydro supply, it's going to be publicly owned. So as a public-owned investment, you're looking at 100 years. You're not looking at 10 years, you're not looking at 20 years. It's like purchasing a house. You don't look to the immediate future to gain profits. You're looking at down the road to supplement when your infrastructure is going to be starting to fail and you need an income to start paying back. And power is the only thing that is going to be more expensive, not less expensive, consistently. So if you're looking at rates today, it may not be feasible, but looking at rates down the road, to have even a trickling of money coming in, which I don't think it will be. I think that in the future, that IPP projects, people, even small IPP projects are highly valuable. And once the infrastructure's in, it's even though you have to remove some sediment once in a while, it's still clean energy that has very little risk or overall damage to the environment. And all of those things, I could say the same for solar. You can't guarantee that the government's going to pay you back for solar. You can't guarantee that you can tie into the lines, but you can pretty much guarantee that our province is going to be looking to clean energy projects like this to start supplementing our grid and get us off of gas. So I do see this as a reduction, and being that it's publicly owned, having our own power source is always a good idea, even if it just means that we can offset our gas reductions with clean power. Have it be our own GHG project that we can use in our own marketplace, where we can invest. We're just starting a GHG marketplace. This could be something that our GHG marketplace could fund and could have people looking to offset their gas with a clean power project. So I see a lot of benefits in this project still. In a time when we're looking at district energy that was on gas and burning garbage, I see this as a far more viable, interesting way to explore a power project that's actually economically viable. Even if it's, marginal, it's still income. And long term, as it pays itself off, it's forever income.
Yeah, I definitely agree with Councillor Chappelle. And I think what staff is looking for, do we move forward in this year? I think great work, really foundational work that we can make some good decisions on in the future. I think what we need to do, and I just want to reference the grant aspect. We may compete with our own grants in that first year, but ideally you're creating revenue that will help pay for some of this infrastructure stuff that we're deficient on currently. So I don't think we can really evaluate it on, well, we won't get this grant because we get this grant. I think that's a bit of a simplistic way of looking at the opportunity. I would like to understand how we can get to sort of ground zero, if you want to call it that, with hydro, without costing us a ton of money. Can we find funding for that environmental study? So that too, I think it was about $200,000 sort of upfront cost to get us to the point where hydro would consider a change in our lease license, whatever. So it would be good to figure out how we can get there without necessarily having to outlay the cash for the uncertainty of that. And I don't expect you to have those answers today. This is something that we don't have to decide today. We don't have to decide tomorrow. We have background information. We can, in future years, decide to move forward on it if economic factors change and all that sort of thing. But if we could get a better understanding of what takes us to a yay or nay with hydro, and then also, in the meantime, explore a variety of grants, because I know they're out there for this kind of thing. And maybe it's maybe it's a partnership with a developer who, who finances it somehow, who knows down the future. So I'd like to understand what the opportunities for granting are. They may not tap into the same funding sources that our other grants tap into, so. Yeah.
I can address some of that. So staff had a meeting with BC Hydro staff, and there were a few things that came out of that meeting. One is that they launched this micro standing offer program in early 2016 with the intent of it being sort of a streamlined process for local governments and First Nations to enter into these energy purchase agreements with BC Hydro. And they indicated that because of Site C and large power coming on, that there may be less of an appetite moving forward. And so as time goes on, the certainty for actually entering into an energy purchase agreement may be declining. So that was one piece. That was one piece that, so if we were to pursue this, there is a bit of a time crunch to have greater certainty. And I think they specified that an application would need to be submitted for 2019, or that the project would actually need to be operational in 2019 to have greater certainty. In terms of how to move forward with this, we have included as a placeholder a budget item that would be funded from the water utilities, so that if council wished to pursue that, we could use that money to proceed with initial permitting and doing those environmental studies to set us up. With this recommendation, we had planned on just dropping that budget, but if council does want to proceed and continue down that path, then we could maintain that budget item and use the money.
And that would be, sorry, out of the water reserve?
Correct.
I just wanted to make sure, I'll have to go make sure it's not being debt financed, right? If that one was out of the reserve.
That's a good question. I'm not sure.
I just want to confirm that. The reason being, council, when this project came across and the construction option came across, I figured to enter in this project, we would probably be borrowing because the water funds are struggling a little bit right now, our water fund reserve. If you were going to borrow for a project that's somewhat unusual in terms of municipal service, I think that the AAP approach to borrowing might be a bit problematic for the ministry and really from our perspective in terms of public engagement and entering into something. So I just want to put that in the back of your mind that borrowing might have to go through it. We might want to align that with an election and a referendum process if you wanted to do that. Or we need to find in-house or grants. Because I think AAP, you could do the AAP, but I would suggest that you'd probably want to more publicly advertise that prior to the AAP process if you chose that approach.
Now that we've done this feasibility stuff and we have sort of numbers, pretty good numbers, good idea. I'm just sort of thinking out loud here, what are the possibilities of even going out to an RFP or something like that basically saying we have this project, or an RFEI, come back with a proposal to do this project, and perhaps we may get a good, I'm just trying to think of a different way of funding it as opposed to just simply municipally funding it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, could we do that? Could we basically go, here, we've done the work, anyone interested in partnering with us on this project, bring us your proposals.
Right. Staff can certainly look into that. I know one of the big benefits of the district proceeding with it is that I think it may be easier to achieve to get permitting and stuff, but if the district was a partner in it, then I think we could potentially still tap into those benefits.
A number of years ago, we explored the idea of a community power project with a proponent who, they came to us and said, and they came to us because we have access to different funding, we have access to different permitting, all those things. So that's the value added we're bringing to this proposal, and we've done our first bit of our homework.
Right.
So maybe on my questions of council, what are your thoughts on that possibility? You don't have to make a decision today necessarily, but is that something council wants to think about? Councilor Alley?
I just keep hearing the words that the return on investment is low, over 40 years, and the risks are so high. And in my conversations with BC Hydro in September, we have overcapacity right now, and Site C is being built. So if they're telling us there may not be more appetite for this, then I think I don't want to spend a lot more staff time or energy on this project right now until we see new opportunities start to show themselves over the next few years. I just don't see return for us. If the consultants are saying that a private company wouldn't take this on, I'm not sure that we should either, as that wouldn't necessarily show the best use of taxpayers' dollars. I would expect a higher rate of return. I think it was a good idea, I'm glad we explored it, but I don't want to spend a lot more energy on it at this point.
Councillor Roulston.
Yeah, I tend to agree. I think this is one of these things which is sort of not our mainstream business and is best left to the private sector if they want to take the risk for that return, which sounds like they might not anyway. I'm not an expert in this field. I suspect one of the reasons this one doesn't make sense is because it's so small. But when you get economies of scale as you go larger, I mean, that's just a guess really, but this one doesn't seem to have sufficient margin in it to justify us spending taxpayer dollars on it. And I think that's the bottom line here is, do we want to risk taxpayer dollars on this? And I get the arguments about the benefits of IPPs and electric power and so forth. I don't think there's any debate about that. In the information, I was involved in some of the discussions around the CPP, it was called, the Community Power Project, in my first term that the Mayor Heinzman just referred to, and we were going to get a share. It was going to be entirely privately funded, and we would just help facilitate the permitting and zoning that was required. But they were dealing on a larger project, a 10 meg project on the Mashiter, which is significantly larger than this, and we would have just received monies for no risk, and that was at that time fundamental to this was the fact that we did not be putting taxpayer money at risk. The other thing I learned from that discussion is that these things have a 40-year lifespan for a couple of reasons. One is that's the length of the maximum length you can get for the water permit, and the second thing is that's the maximum length you can get from hydro power. And at the end of that, they figure the machinery isn't worth all that much, and there's no certainty about the future, and so they have a very small residual value, if any, at that point. So it's maybe the machinery will last longer, maybe not, and maybe significant reinvestment will be required at some point during that period. All in all, I just don't want to commit taxpayer dollars to it. There's some possibility about somebody coming along and wanting to take this on, and we could partner with it without risking funds and just assist with the permitting and so forth. I'm prepared to look at that, but that's the extent of it for me.
Councillor Blackmore.
I mean, I think that maybe at this point it is good to pause for a year on this. You know, things may change significantly as far as BC Hydro and all of the Site C, depending on the outcome of provincial election and a bunch of other factors. But I mean, I do take Councillor Chappelle's point as far as like electricity is always going to be getting more and more expensive. Like every generation of electricity that you put online costs way more, like by multiple factors, to actually be involved. And I understand that right now the wholesale rate that BC Hydro is willing to commit to is quite low, and that's you know, problematic from getting it started right now. But I do also think that, you know, if we do have the opportunity in terms of our hydro resources within our region and our district, moving towards an idea of a sort of self-sufficiency where we're powering our own needs and then we sell the surplus out to. And then that insulates us from Squamish businesses, Squamish homeowners from major hydro rate increases, which we know, like retail rates, we know are coming. All this money that's being spent on Site C, somebody's going to pay for that, and it's going to be the ratepayers. So, you know, I like that we have some more good numbers on this. So, you know, but I agree with the pause for this year, and you know, I think we should revisit it next year. And I still think it's something to sort of consider. And again, it's still the model of Nelson, right? I mean, Nelson, they started out with, you know, investing in the 1920s, and you know, that really paid dividends for them. And I just did a quick search, and it looks like their capacity is somewhere between 1,000 and 7,000 kilowatts, so 1 to 7 megawatts. So that's sort of an order of magnitude. We're talking about a half a megawatt, but you know, maybe this is just part one of getting to that capacity. So
Yeah, it used to be that many municipalities had their own energy utility. Nelson's kept theirs over the years. Other ones have sold them, and Britannia Beach had their own. And I think, if I remember correctly, Nelson revenue into their coffers is well over $10 million a year just from the profits made on their energy utility. So there's benefit and there's certainty for their ratepayers on that, for sure. I'll go to David then to...
There's a net metering program, so if you're actually able to generate power and consume it on site, so say at our wastewater treatment plant location, then you can sell the excess. Unfortunately, in this case, because we're so isolated from any kind of district facilities, that opportunity isn't available, but it may be a consideration if we're considering other type of renewable power sources to be looking at where we're actually consuming a lot.
Thank you. Yes, I'm happy to put it on pause for you, but I also would like staff to keep in mind if there's grants that become available, I still would be interested in applying for grants. Just, you know, if there's specific grants to power projects, I would like that to be kept top of mind. And I can agree with Councillor Blackman-Wolf's assessment of power needs. And really, it'd be absolutely prudent for the district to be able to run its own hydroelectricity out of its own project for exactly those reasons. And you can always argue costs unless you get into the game. It's really like, and you're looking at a 100-year investment. Our city is going to need power forever. And as fossil fuels become more, I expect them to get more and more expensive because carbon tax, electricity, if we generate it ourselves and it isn't under control of a utility except for buying in, if we can actually maintain it for our own infrastructure, it can be, you know, it's such a great long-term investment. But I would agree to keep it out of this year's budget for exactly the reasons that have been said. And the uncertainties with the political situation, I think, are more relevant than you know, minimal cost, because you can't really judge power projects and getting in on a cost, like looking at the cost now and saying we can't get in today because it's too unaffordable. If you have an opportunity to get in, you should get in. Oh, I felt so Jewish there.
I don't know what that means, but so I think
You're doing my grandfather right.
you challenge.
Exactly.
So I think what I'm generally hearing is not now, although we've done the homework and maybe, you know, if someone walks in the door and says, I want to pay for it and give you 50% of the revenue, then in theory, don't you know, bring that back to council for consideration. But at this point, I think I'm hearing not to pursue it actively, and who knows what the future will bring. So there's a suggested motion to receive, and that the District of Squamish not pursue, maybe I'll just at this time, the Mashiter Creek Hydroelectric project. Moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Blackman-Wolf. Call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thanks, David.
Thank you.
Can you add the words, not at this time?
Not at this time, yeah. Just, I think, yeah. That makes sense? Got that, Sarah? This is Sarah's first time taking minutes in our chamber. She's taken it in other chambers, but welcome. Moving on to the agenda, we are at the Development Permit Area Guidelines Amendment. Verbal update from our Director of Development Services.
And I will pass the buck off to our city planner, Sarah.
Great, thank you, Council. So in October
This
of
is Sarah McJanet, she's the planner.
Hi, sorry, thank you, Sarah. In October, Council made a motion that the Development Permit Area Guideline amendments with respect to accessibility be brought forward to Council by the end of November 2016. And updates to the Development Permit Area Guidelines, particularly related to accessibility, are well overdue, like by a decade or more. So thanks to Councillor Pryor and the Mayor for bringing these forward, and a special shout out to Sarah Tipler, who has been banging the drum and sticking with us on advisory design panel all these years as our accessibility champion. She couldn't be here today. She's probably watching online, so hello to Sarah. The check-in with council today is really to highlight and confirm and get support for the scope of improvements that we'd like to do. Talk about the larger development permit area amendments that are being undertaken in conjunction with the OCP update, and to highlight how accessibility policies and guidelines fit into that and options for bringing forward in terms of timing. So this is to highlight that accessibility and inclusion are firstly being addressed at the highest level in our OCP, in the big picture plan policy. So we're tackling accessibility within healthy built environment, housing, accessible and active transportation, including all of the safe routes to school, in parks and play areas, social connections, but also sort of an overall lens around age-friendly policies for not only youth, but seniors and families, and also related to participation in civic life. So these are these high-level policies are directly informing the development permit area guidelines. And I just wanted to note too, this is an area that the province is also providing a lot of support on for local government. So there's this Accessibility 2024 program, and they've produced excellent resources that we are drawing from around age-friendly and accessible communities. So these resources have been critical for us in OCP, but also highlighting what we can do better in our development permit area guidelines. This is just to say that specific to the development permit area guidelines that we're revising in conjunction with the OCP, we're doing a lot of overhaul. So firstly, as council is aware, this is a big endeavor because the development permit area guidelines weren't updated with the last OCP. So we are, as you know, creating new development permit areas for hazard, we're totally overhauling our environmental DPA and also bringing in the energy and water conservation and GHG reduction areas or topics. And then also we have begun to tackle the form and character development permit areas. So our intent is to embed accessibility guidelines and amendments across all of the district's form and character guidelines for commercial, multi-unit, industrial. Initially, because of the extent of development activity that we've seen in multi-unit residential, we've focused on development permit area 7, which is multi-unit residential. So last spring, what we did was the planning team, we actually did a scan to scope out the extent of revisions that we thought were needed. Priority areas that we know that we want to address include the overall improved site design and coordination, but also accessibility and connectivity, all of the pedestrian and cycling infrastructure and amenities, guidelines around usable open space and play spaces, as well as the waste management piece. So in September, we took a draft set of amended guidelines for development permit area 7 to advisory design panel. And we can forward you that whole package if you like. I think the minutes came to you already, but there was overall support for the proposed amendments, and they made some suggestions for additional work and clarity and drawings. They want to see drawings in the guidelines. This is a snapshot of some of the specific circulation and accessibility guidelines that we're working to refine. We don't have to go down the rabbit hole here, but just wanted to highlight that a lot of it relates to the overall site design, connectivity of developments with the greater neighborhood, universal access, continuity within projects, uninterrupted barrier-free paths of travel along pathways, surfacing, materials, things that will help with those with visual impairments, and lighting design. So that's just a sort of a teaser of some of the things that we are working on. I reached out to Sarah Tippler specifically. She knows that we're presenting to council today, and I asked her in her view, what were the priorities for accessibility for Squamish to consider. And so her response on this was that we should really be focusing as priority areas around accessible routes and neighborhood connectivity, which is great because we're definitely focused in on that. Implementing accessible parking design. So we've got criteria in our zoning and in our building access handbooks, but on the implementation side, we can do better. She also thought this goes beyond design guidelines, but accessible rental units, accessible recreation, so ensuring that we're being mindful of accessibility for viewing areas and water access for water recreation, as well as transportation, so focusing in on our transit facilities and things like that. So that's from Sarah Tipler. So what I wanted to explain that in terms of thinking about accessibility and inclusive built environment, I think we need to think about the scale and seamlessly embedding accessibility at all these different levels. So this is just to show, as I was trying to map out for myself, at the public streets and trails level, accessibility plays into sidewalk design, crosswalks, parking, transit lighting, and we address those through our municipal streetscape standards and our subdivision bylaw and zoning and trail standards. And then more at the DP level, we're dealing with the site. So internal circulation, pathways, again, a lot of the same stuff, parking, lighting and landscape, but also beyond, so looking at parks and playgrounds, amenity areas, even accessible site furnishings and play equipment. And then at the building level, while the BC Building Code tackles accessible buildings and also building access and access from the street, there is a lot of
I'm hearing like somebody's computer has actually got noise coming off of it. Is it just me? Do you guys hear it too? Like TV? Am I channeling something? Whoa, okay.
No, you're not feeling well.
No, I'm like hearing
having
like a radio station or something.
There's people talking in the lobby, and there is a hum coming from one of the systems back here.
Okay, it's just me.
Continue. Okay, no worries. So this is, just to wrap up, this is just to say that at the building level, the building code really deals with a lot of the required code-related accessibility, but there's a lot of interplay with the site. So the point here is that we are really wanting to, I love this triangle because it sort of shows the accessibility focus that we can take at the OCP level, and then in terms of standards, so our streetscape and development standards, our guidelines, and then also in terms of how that plays out in ensuring that those accessibility pieces are being met at the development review stage, and then also opportunities where they arise to do audits of existing development. So this is to show the bigger picture. But going back to next steps and our options, so for timing, we wanted to talk to council about options to advance accessibility amendments, either as a standalone OCP amendment to come forward right away, or to incorporate them within the larger form and character development permit guideline amendments that we're going to be bringing forward as part of the big kahuna draft plan, OCP plan.
Any bylaw that has kahuna in the title?
The big kahuna. So we just wanted to get a sense, we know this is a priority, it's long overdue. There's a lot of things at play. We're trying to make these guidelines the best they can be, and right now the work that Matt and I are doing are, we're taking the policy directives and then really trying to marry them in closely with the guidelines so that they connect. But absolutely, if council desires us to bring forward a standalone amendment, initially we can do that. It will take time away from the bigger OCP work that we're doing, but we wanted just to put it back to you and get any feedback if we're missing anything or off track in any way.
Councillor Chappelle, questions?
I am wondering about, so I handed John Chapman at one of the meetings a survey that was being done by Simon Fraser to actually collaborate with communities on working on how the public can engage with our revisions in our OCP amendments. And what it does is it actually gives a survey to people that have mobility challenges that they can take around your own community, so you get feedback that's directly related to your community. so that people that are either in wheelchairs or on crutches or however they consider their mobility challenged, they can fill out a survey and say, this area needs work, this area doesn't need work, this would be better. And it gives you something that directly challenges your current bylaws that is informed by your own infrastructure. So I'd like to look at something like that, even if it could be like 10 people, that it can be able-bodied people that end up, that you can just borrow a wheelchair for the day and roll around and be like, these are our challenges, these are the areas I couldn't get in or out, these are the curb letdowns that need to happen. I'd like to see that as a part of the development of our policy, so that we are not just implementing changes, theories that are from other communities, but that it is directly related to our own infrastructure challenges. But I love the tactile indicators and everything you presented is, I really enjoy that this is being done.
I'll definitely look at the SFU survey that you provided to John.
They're happy to work with us too to do the data, so our staff doesn't have to. It's a research project out of SFU, so they are happy to help our community move policy forward without having to deal without having to burden staff on.
Yeah, and I think particularly in something like accessibility, but it can be applied to a number of different things. So that ground truthing, real life experience aspect to how we develop our policies, I think is a valuable direction to go. Jason and Beth.
Oh, so this is specifically just on the multifamily development permit area guidelines. I'm wondering, first of all, for the internal circulation, I'm wondering if we're specifically going to have guidelines that talk about or set even standards for connectivity at certain intervals. So if we have a, the very common thing we've seen a lot of lately is those really long, deep lots on Government Road being rezoned for multifamily, and how do we make sure that we're not creating a bunch of enclaves and that we can have pedestrian circulation at, like, say, every, 200 meters, for example, and just have that as a requirement rather than, relying on, developers to figure it out. And then also you make sure that in subsequent years that you have this good network of internal sort of circulation. So I just wanted to throw that out there. And then the other thing was our sidewalk standards, or sort of streetscape standards, but specifically sidewalks on our arterial roads. And I don't know if we already have a different standard or not. And I'm just thinking in terms of, on a very side street, when you have a sidewalk, it's okay. I know we tend to just put it right at the curb so that, you minimize the loss of any green space. But on arterial road, do we have like requirement for like a buffer so that people aren't walking right at the edge of a busy road, and whether or not that's addressed or not? I haven't had a chance to look into them. But
That's more in our subdivision development control bylaw, and that's coming up for, it's, I think, scheduled in this year's budget to be updated. So those are the exact things that we need to make sure we're incorporating in there.
I've definitely had some preliminary discussion with Laura Prinsick about the next opportunity to make amendments for like accessibility focused amendments to the standards, because if you look at them right now, we haven't spec'd out like the letdowns, the tactile warning strips, like all those kinds of things. We can definitely have further discussion when that comes back around for review. And I just wanted to add as well that just to your points around guidelines, I think we can certainly craft some more directive guidelines around the connectivity within and breaking up like long roads and ensuring that there's maximized opportunity for connections and within the development to try and get away from those long like linear roads without, we were also providing guidelines around like having at least one side with a sidewalk within these internal projects as well. And then finally, Sarah Tippler pointed out that there was a on the ground exercise that Vancouver Coastal Health, they did a bit of an audit for the downtown. and that was with Karen Clark. So I did get a copy of it. I think it's several years old, but they looked at problem spots. So I know that that's been done sort of ad hoc a little bit in the past. But yeah, so we're going to try and draw from those resources, but any others that we can.
Thank you. It was just to your question you asked us at the end of the presentation about bringing along a standalone set of guidelines now, independent, I take it, of the OCP generally. And I'm just sort of trying to figure out the pros and cons of that, because I guess the added work is obviously a con, but the OCP we expect to have finalized, I think, maybe by mid-year, give or take. Are we missing something if we didn't bring these guidelines along separately, or could we wait for them? Are we worried about a development happening in the middle that might not be subject to them? Is that the problem? And if so, in a number of other instances, we've had interim things or pending policy that we've applied to something that's coming along now. And could we carry along that? If we have this idea in our mind about what we want to see, even though it actually isn't in the bylaw yet, could we start applying it to some development coming in the door tomorrow?
We certainly have been applying the accessibility thinking to the extent that we can, and we haven't had any pushback really from the development community around a lot of these accessibility pieces, and a lot of it comes from like code requirements providing accessibility to the street, for example, for multi-unit residential. So it's not new, and I think I don't think that there's a huge risk to waiting if we wanted to do that and bring forward a more wholesome set of refined form and character guidelines. I don't think there's a lot of risk that we wouldn't be trying to apply this a lot as we go anyway.
We benefit from having Sarah Tippler on the ADP, and people are very receptive normally to anything related to accessibility, even if it's a development permit stage and our guidelines don't specifically speak to it. It's the larger pedestrian cycling connectivity through the developments that's currently not addressed that I think is probably be more useful to bring it as part of the overall OCP. So the accessibility stuff, I think we're addressing it on a kind of ad hoc basis. And if if we're looking at mid-year for OCP adoption, I think that we're not going to miss much. The other pedestrian-related connectivity we may be missing out because of our VP guidelines, but I think that needs also more work.
Thank you.
My thoughts are that the OCP is being developed, and I know our planners are trying to pull in all this different kind of information. And before that large document drops as a draft, I want to make sure that to the best extent possible, we sort of crossed our T's and dotted our I's all the way through. And so if we can, sort of hobble along a little bit till mid-year, then I think it's best to keep our planners' attention on producing the larger document than producing specialized pieces of policy in advance of it. I think that we've made this a priority. I think that Sarah helps us in EDP. I think council is really looking for this now when it comes before us, and I think we'll be using our discretion to look for these sorts of things. But I don't think it's a great idea to pull people's attention off what we need to produce, which is a full OCP draft, and get it out into the community.
Thanks. I'm just having a moment to reflect on that and think, is that true? And I disagree, because I think that really what we're doing is we're rezoning mass amounts of density without having these policies in place. And I prefer to have these policies in place as soon as possible that will inform our development currently, and let developers know that this has to be done as a thoughtful community immediately. Since we've been waiting for the OCP, we've gone through numerous high-density rezonings, and none of those neighborhoods are currently connected via pathways, or there's a little pathway here and there, but overall structure of our community is changing rapidly, too quickly, in advance of our OCP. So if there's something that can add to the conversation of advanced the conversation of accessibility, this actually should have been done years ago. So I appreciate it being brought forward now, and having some policy in place that can be integrated into the OCP. I don't see it as an and or that having that policy piece in place in advance is going to draw away any attention from the OCP final document. Go ahead.
With respect to some of those larger multifamily developments that we have coming online, have we been looking at it through this lens?
I would say that certainly the planning team, we've had these, this applies to the Development Permit Area 7 guidelines specifically, so we are actively referencing not only the accessibility, but the direction and guidelines that we're thinking about for waste, for example, and the overall connectivity and whatnot. So they're actively informing our development review, absolutely, as we go.
Yeah, and I hear both Councillor Elliott and Councillor Chappelle's points. I mean, I think the balance is trying to figure out how we make sure we're moving the OCP. We don't delay that because it's foundational and important, but at the same time, ensure that we're not letting things drop through the cracks. And we've been pretty good about bringing amendment bylaws back on a regular basis so we can, address things right away. So I think that's, finding that balance is really the challenge. And if there's a big one that just keeps falling through the cracks, maybe we should address that sooner rather than later. But I hear, Councillor Elliott, you could continually just do things and not get the OCP done, and really that is the foundational piece. So how we do that, a few thoughts, and this is just generally speaking about DPs. I find that there's a gap between our rezoning and our DPs, and oftentimes, we get a project proposal and it kind of looks like this, and then it goes through the DP process, it kind of looks like this. And then at the DP process, discretion is more ambiguous in terms of what our decision-making points are. And I think forming character now is forming character. I know some other municipalities add on different, form character in siting or form character in, is there, what's under, and you don't have to answer it now, but just sort of the bigger picture. What's allowable under the Act that allows us to govern the DPs? And how do we make sure, like I find DPs come back and, they technically, they meet our DP guidelines, but character is a very subjective thing. How do we, and yet we feel like we'll met our guidelines, so we don't deal with things like connectivity as well as we should, and they're not in there. Design excellence, good neighbor policies, like how do we make sure we're integrating this a little bit better into the DP process? Because really the DP process is the last time the public and council has an ability to see this before, stuff happens behind the scenes and building permits get issued, and I feel like there's a gap between the zoning and the DP, or at least the way we structure it. So maybe just take those thoughts into consideration, livability. Like there's a whole bunch of sort of very subjective aspects to the DP. It's hard to communicate. You want to communicate clearly with the developers so they know what the expectations are. But at the same time, we're sort of not getting to a DP stage and feeling like we haven't got to where we need to go, or we feel handcuffed by a decision because it's non-discretionary to some extent, and there's interpretation to some extent, and so it's a really hard thing to do. But maybe there's a way we can be more inclusive in how we frame our DP and the form and character aspects of it. So just some general sort of verbal diarrhea on that. Sorry about that. So there are. Is there a recommended motion, or is this just an update?
It was just an update.
Great. Yeah, go ahead.
Public engagement right now, how is that being done with our OCP? We had one massive engagement, which was excellent. We had only 100 people engage on the OCP, so how is it being done? No, we had 100 comments, and then we had the pizza parties. So I'm just wondering what else we are doing.
Can we give a 2-minute, just because we added an agenda item and we're a little ahead of schedule, but I don't want to get off track.
Okay.
So 2-minute just on engagement, because we have done, we're in phase 3 now.
Yeah.
So in phase 1 and 2 had different pieces, but significant engagement on those pieces.
Correct, yeah. So right now we're in phase 3. We're coming to the end of that plan drafting phase. So once we have the draft plan in place, it's going to come back for a blessing in front of council before we take it out into the public realm, and the community advisory committee as well. And then in phase 3, we will have a whole wave of engagement around the draft plan. That will involve a big event as well as mobile engagement. So I'm going to be like boots on the ground, roaming around the town, everywhere I can get to. And then we'll also we're planning.
Not just you by yourself.
Yeah. So we're planning a big event, mobile engagement. As well as paper insert, online survey, sort of the rest. So there is a substantive engagement wave to come with the draft plan. And then once that comes to a close, we will, Modus will help us craft a phase 3 engagement summary. That will come back before council and before the CAC committee. And then we basically do plan revisions, and we work through all of the issues that need to be resolved before we bring the plan back for more of a formal approval stage. Yeah, and that will involve all of the agency referrals, and we'll be working with Squamish Nation. So that's
I think that's just really important for the public to hear.
yeah. But for the development permit area specific pieces, those are part of the OCP ultimately. So they would actually be part of the bylaw as a schedule to the bylaw and be subject to the same public engagement and hearing requirements. So
I think we had so much engagement in phase 1 and quite a bit of engagement in phase 2. And phase 3 is the laborious,
the heavy
sitting in
lifting.
front of your computer. I know you're very taking in all this input, all the policy pieces and writing it. So phase 3 does feel like it's a bit of a slow time, but it's all the actually assimilating all this information, which is huge. And then the end of phase 3, it goes out to engagement again. So I think it just feels like there's no engagement right now. It's just because we're in the drafting.
Definitely, yeah.
Doug.
Thank you. It was just to provide some certainty. I'm not sure if we did decide or give staff an answer to the question about the bringing forward the accessibility amendments separate from the OCP generally. And if I understand the answer to the question I asked earlier, things like connectivity and so forth are not part of the bringing forward decision. They are part of the larger OCP along with all the other things. And so I tend to agree. I don't think we are missing at the moment accessibility issues being applied to these developments coming in the door. So I don't see any advantage to stopping working on that and then postponing inevitably the larger ones. So I would like to see us get to the finish line on the big ones, because I think that's where the answers to a lot of the things we've been talking about here are. And so my comment is to not bring them forward independently.
Thank you. So that's it? We're good? Thank you. Moving on in the agenda, business park suburban plan zoning discussion, and I do see there's people that are to make some comments, and if you want to chime in, just put your hand up. Anybody else? What's that?
There was a late item. We're going to do this wrong from the witness.
Thank you. I'm just going to put up the aerial of the business park to better inform our discussion.
Thank you. Whenever you're ready.
Okay, my name is J.Velaniskis. I'm the Director of Community Planning. And today I wanted to bring to Council's attention the northwest corner of the business park that has, I believe, 5 properties who are all zoned residential, who are also designated residential in the official community plan, but which are geographically located in the business park. And these are the properties between Pioneer Way and Government Road. So I'm just going to turn on the zoning layer. One of these properties has been recently subject to a rezoning proposal, the Hudson Station, and then we have a few others in here. So they're all zoned currently RS2, which is essentially a residential zone. It allows for density up to a duplex. Geographically, these properties are in the industrial park, and we think that these properties in the long run should probably be assembled with the business park and included as part of the business park in our OCP and our zoning. The current zoning, however, allows for duplexes, and we're seeing a lot of interest in these properties to develop them under the current zoning. So what staff would like to have a discussion on is whether council would concur with the opinion that these should be part of the business park, and if so, and then the district should probably be moving towards actively rezoning that area for industrial use. Otherwise, we're going to see duplexes in the near future on those properties.
So, currently, a few of these properties have residential homes on it. So all
They
the
do,
ones
yes.
on this side, and the other one has industrial on either side. I understand how these ended up being zoned residential, historically speaking. That other lot, do we know how that ever became zoned residential?
The lot by...
No, the one, I understand there's houses on them, I understand why
Yeah.
in theory they were historically residential. I'm curious about the one, no?
You have to expand out.
Okay, I'm expecting
That one,
this one.
yeah. Like, that's the one that really,
Yes.
from my point of view, sticks out like a sore thumb. The other ones, I can understand why they're there, historically speaking, so.
Yeah.
But this one I don't understand.
That's a really good question. I don't know the answer to that. I believe it is district-owned property.
Oh, is it?
I believe it is, yes.
Okay. You know what, I think you're right, we own 3 lots there, don't we?
Mhm. So eventually that should be rezoned as well, but there's, it's not time sensitive.
Okay. Questions from council on the business park zoning aspects?
I just want to say for, as far as employment land, was this included in the employment land study, or was it?
The employment land study only looked for at properties that were already zoned.
So, yeah, I completely agree, like, the original, I've heard conflicting views from previous councils as to why the lines in the industrial park are so confusing. I'm also, well, the industrial park is now a business park,
Yes.
and we really need a comprehensive plan for that area, because currently, right now, there's all sorts of professional businesses moving into the business park, which are also at odds with an industrial zoning, apparently. I think that people that move that sort of business in there should be aware that it's industrial land and shouldn't, but, noise conflicts are the biggest problem that end up losing industrial land. So, but I'm also, there's a lot of regions in other areas that have mixed industrial and residential, and done it quite successfully, but with keeping like extremely large industrial with very minimal residential up top, and usually it's owner-operated residential. So I'm open to novel ideas, but I do not want to lose any industrial land. And I agree with keeping the buffer and keeping industry away from residential. And what we're going to see is densification in that area, and then complaints about industry, and then people buying up the industrial lands and wanting to rezone them residential. So I'm not interested in going through that process. We really need to maintain our employment lands.
So the question at the beginning of Susan's was, how is this treated in the employment construct?
I don't believe it is treated in any way.
It's not in?
I think, but referring to the business park sub-area plan, it is, those lots are all designated for industrial business. So there is a bit of a mismatch between some of our planning documents to a degree.
Yeah, go ahead.
You know, we always have to contemplate the transition from the industrial park into Aspen Road and the houses along Government. And so, you know, what would be a best practice in planning in order to make that transition work between our neighborhoods here? I mean, regardless of how we zone those properties, but you know, if you think all the way along Aspen Road there, and then that part of Government Road, I mean, you know, do we go to a more creative zoning like we have in the south part of downtown, where it's kind of a mixed use, so you could have residential above and industrial uses? So like, how do we make it palatable for the neighbors along Aspen Road? Do we keep buffers there? Do we change it to a zoning that allows some industrial but allows some, like, what would be a best practice here from a planning perspective?
So the business park sub-area plan does have a buffer built into it, policy-wise, with respect to Aspen Road. It doesn't have a buffer on that stretch of Government Road where the residentially zoned properties are. I think from a planning perspective, the sites along Government Road could lend themselves to some form of mixed-use development for sure. At this point, what we're suggesting, because I believe if we don't do something now, we will have duplexes on those properties. What we're suggesting is to put a sort of a pause, put on a light industrial zone on it. The property owners or prospective buyers will be interested in adding residential development to it, and at that time we can go for a process to rezone some of those properties. But I agree that some residential mixed in with the light industrial does make sense there. Pure residential, especially at low density, does not.
Doug and then Pete and Ms. Whitaker, if you want to speak just on that.
Thank you. I tend to agree with Councillor Elliott, because when I was looking at that, I mean, it seems to me that you could make the same or have the same discussion about that strip right along Aspen Road, which is shown with trees on it, which, if I recall the discussion we had around leasing to the festival, it's a 10-meter buffer.
20 meter.
20-meter buffer, and I know we expanded it for the festival use, but 20-meter. But it's the transition, because on the other side of Aspen Road, and Aspen Road by itself is not much of a barrier, you have residential housing. And so that's the only place, the south side of the business park does have a natural buffer, but this one doesn't. And so I would think that we would want to carry the whole thing right across, and I think I would look for some kind of transition zoning, at least for I'll call it the top portion of those lots. I'm not going to be specific about how big an area, to provide a bit of a transition between industrial and the residential across the street. But I would do it all. I wouldn't just focus on that one area. And I agree that the bottom half of those lots are not, in my view, suitable for residential, notwithstanding the fact that there are people living there now, but not for intense residential development or densifying it. I just don't agree with that. We had all the issues that came around that proposed rezoning adjacent to the train tracks, and it's still there. So, so I think the bottom part could be light industrial. The top part, I would look for some kind of transition, and I'm not going to be more specific. I'll let you kind of think about what that might look like. But I would carry it across, because I think the same issues apply to all of those other lots going right out almost to the highway.
Yeah, no, I tend to agree with Doug. I mean, there's sort of that pre-existing buffer there. I was just looking at this document we were provided here, which is the business plan sub-area, business park sub-area plan 2002 May. There's a piece in here that says create a buffer between the residential properties on the north side of Aspen Road and the industrial business uses on the south side of Aspen. The buffer will consist of the undeveloped portion of Aspen Road allowance 20 meters wide, which will be closed to vehicular traffic, which it is to some extent. And then landscape. Don't think that ever happened, but so it sort of speaks to that in here. But I think it would be well worth preserving that strip of portions all the way along there, some kind of a buffer.
And this was from Mr. Whitaker, and I invite you if you want to speak to it. But I believe, Councillor Kent, that the proposal back in 1992, whenever this was, 2002, not hold on the whole thing, but be here. I'm just saying that that's what's proposed in the bylaw.
Sure, but there, this is also referring to the Aspen Road piece.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I think that's always been part of it. The Aspen Road, we've played with the width of it a little bit with the Squamish Mountain Music Festival. And it's considerably less than the buffer on the south end of the park.
Yes, and the district currently owns a large portion along Aspen Road. If the district was ever to sell those properties, we should probably need to put like a covenant on in order to establish that buffer legally, because right now it's just in the sub-area plan. So it isn't much.
Mr. Whitaker, you want to try this?
Yes.
Yeah. Just come up and have a seat.
Wherever you want.
Anyways, fine.
I'm Jim Whitaker. I live at 39680 Government Road. I think this is the property you're discussing. I'm a bit hard of hearing, so I missed some of it.
Well, we're discussing, I think, all 4 properties.
Okay, this is just by coincidence. I found a document today. I didn't bring it with me. We went through this in 2004 and 5. About, when they redid the community plan, that little parcel, the 4 lots, were put into industrial by the council at that time's mistake. They admitted it, that it was not intended, that the industrial park was always planned to be Pioneer. So we fought it and got the community plan changed back to R2 at that time. Now, there was also a buffer established. I started this 35 years ago, fighting for a buffer along the side of my property because it was all bush then. And the council at the time, it was Easy Oscario that was the mayor then, they approved this 200-foot buffer. It's in the handout that got somewhere along the line it got lost. And we went back again in 1997. There was some other plan, something about putting a sawmill there, I believe. Anyhow, we went back and the council verified it. That was 20 years ago, that there should be a buffer there. And everybody agreed with it. It was all worked out. And then there was another plan in 2002 when the current industrial park zoning was all discussed and laid out. And this proceeded into about 2005 by the time we got that little parcel put back into R2. And at the time, this buffer was supposed to stand for as long as this property was used as residential. So somewhere in the last few years, we've lost that buffer. And that was why I came here today, was asked why and how, after 4 councils had approved it being a buffer, it's disappeared. So that's why I'm here today.
So the buffer, as it appears in the sub-area plan, is actually on this property.
It's on the undeveloped property there.
Yes.
Yes.
So this buffer is in the current plan? On that property you just pointed out?
Yes, in the sub-area plan. Now, in the sub-area plan. Now, it's not in the zoning bylaw. There's no covenant on the property. So it's just in the sub-area plan.
Which is the OCP.
Which is the OCP, yes.
And how wide is that buffer?
I believe it's 20 meters as well.
Just the same as the one on the... So the buffer is in the OCP, the sub-area plan, which is a appendix of the OCP.
Yes.
On lot whatever that lot is there.
This big lot, corner lot.
Undeveloped.
And it goes north-south,
Yes.
so just like this. So it is in the sub-area plan. Now, would that, the buffer typically be, it would typically be in the sub-area plan and OCP, not in a zoning bylaw?
Yes, but if the zoning bylaw allows, if the zoning bylaw prescribes a side lot setback, legally, I think it doesn't have much teeth if it's just in the OCP. I mean,
How would you even put it in a zoning bylaw?
you'd have to put it as a site-specific setback. So establish certain properties that have a setback.
Okay.
On the subdivision, when that property is subdivided.
In the zoning bylaw, yes, so subdivided or developed.
This here then, yeah, go ahead.
So there's a clause.
Yeah, just so for clarity, what obligation does that property owner have currently to respect that buffer?
That is unclear. I think that's a legal question. I
think it's not much.
not much.
The zoning would, you'll typically read down, so the setback in the zoning bylaw would be the driving force, and if that's 3 metres or 4 metres, then that's all that we could force them to provide. If they wanted to provide more, that's possible, but if they didn't, then we might be in a fairly precarious situation.
So what I think I hear staff suggesting is that if council wants to make sure we're, it's separate from some of the conversation we've had, but if council wants to ensure that buffer, we need to put a motion forward saying that we want a zoning amendment to site specifically require that buffer.
Yes.
Just to clarify. Okay. Is that it?
Yep.
I'm just wondering about the buffer between the railway. You know, we're never gonna, this whole area has always been industrial, except for that one property. I know it's all been, that area's been residential, I agree with you.
There's always been residential,
Yes.
except briefly in a mistake in the drawings, this little sketch. And then it proceeded from there. Somebody wanted to build some warehouses there at one time, and the local residents all stood up, and we had petitions and everything else, and we got, the council listened to us and put it back to residential again.
My concern is that our lack isn't for residential anymore, our lack is now of employment lands. And really,
Can you?
Can I just, I have to speak.
Mr. Whitaker, just let Councillor Chappelle know.
Yeah, you can speak after, you can respond to me afterwards, thank you. So our community currently is densifying everywhere except in the industrial park. That industrial park is our only employment land for 100 years. We have very limited employment land. We have very low density housing there currently, and as far as developers buying up and densifying, it ends up eating up our employment land, not the other way around. And I agree with maybe keeping that buffer there while the house is there, but in eventuality, I think we really need to look at having more employment land, not more density. And the railway is right there. So one buffer, I would be more worried about having a buffer in the 396 in that area than in the other area, because you're going to get the noise from the train shunting, not really from the industry. And the industrial land on the other side of the railway tracks, that's all industrial land. So you are in the center of all this industrial land, and sometimes we have to look at single residences and wonder what the good is for the community. And for me, the common good outweighs taking up land to protect one residence from noise when the area is an industrial area. And I appreciate the discrepancy between those two areas, but right now we have no employment land. So if we want to have a sustainable community, we need employment land, not more density.
You mean to tell me for 35 years I've been fighting for this to be maintained as residential land for about 5 different councils that all agreed with me, and you're saying no now?
Speak through me just so
Yes, through the mayor, I am saying that the overall needs of the community sometimes have to supersede an individual's desire. It doesn't mean that your land, you're not going to lose your house, you're not, really I appreciate your concerns, but the overall concerns of the community really, for me, are, is this a sustainable community without having any employment lands? And do I want a developer to come and buy up your land and ask me for rezoning for multifamily residential in an area that I consider employment lands? And yes, I am saying no.
Well, and fundamentally now, a developer wouldn't have to come for rezoning
Yeah.
because it's owned RS2
Exactly.
currently.
I'm
Just to
absolutely
clarify.
dumbfounded.
Yeah, I've got Councillor Kent.
Correct me if I'm wrong, but is not that piece of land where the buffer exists right here, right now, is that not tied to the lot that's directly across the street from our Queensway there? Aren't those lots both connected, or is it not one that's divided by the road?
What, did I say
So,
something?
I believe someone
you may be right.
in real
This
estate,
lot-
I believe someone told me that the
Oh.
real estate guy
It's a hook lot?
Yes.
mentioned
Yeah.
that it's a hook lot that joins across the road, so the current owner that has
Yes,
the bare lot on the right is also the owner now of that piece of wooded property.
Yes, it's actually one lot.
Yes.
With
We
two
don't have access to
addresses.
that, but I believe you're right, it is actually one
Yeah.
lot.
Just wanted that for clarity.
So, I wouldn't mind taking the conversation back to where we were at the beginning in terms of how do we create a buffer area, a buffer zone, and I think Councillor Elliott talked about the end of Second Avenue where you're creating some industrial uses, but you're also densifying with some residential and creating more opportunity there, generally speaking. So I wouldn't mind if council sort of discussed that a little bit more, whereby you're, I don't know what we call it, but some sort of CD zone where essentially you're allowing residential, but also ensuring employment land. But I do think that is a good transition area. I do worry about particularly a lot of residential right up against the railway yard, so I'd like council to put their minds around that. But and I don't necessarily, it could be that whole corner, including that piece of the one lot that's on the west side of Queensway, maybe that becomes this more comprehensive development as well in the future. So wouldn't mind, does that make sense to people? So that whole corner, Pioneer Way, Queensway, Government, that whole block, creating a buffer of uses / residential into the whole North Hills area.
I'm interested in the, like as Councillor Elliott said, it's sort of a mixed, like I said before, is we've already got this area that has become, all sorts of employment uses. And I'd rather have density of employment with, if we were going to put residences there, they complain about the rail yards and we get the same letters that we get from people that are right up against the railroads currently, and deal with that for the rest of council. And then on the other side as well. But I would be happy to explore a transition area, as Councillor Elliott has suggested, that has more medium density with mixed use. As I said, there's a lot of mixed use industrial buildings that do allow residential. That wouldn't devalue the land in any way, that might be a good transition zone. But that is, as opposed to, I can't remember the word, is basically nullifying the land and making it not developable at all by saying it's a buffer. I see that there's lots of sterilizing. That is exactly the word I was looking for. Yeah, I'm not interested in sterilizing any of the land in that area, but maybe there are reasonable mixed uses that allow more employment and density, but do allow for some residential uses.
Jonas, do you think you could comment on the mixed use residential / employment in that quadrant?
Yes, we could look at downtown south, and we could also look at Paco Road area because we've done some recent zoning work there that tries to accommodate residential with industrial in the same sort of neighborhood and on the same properties. So we could, I think that is a suitable zone, suitable type of zoning for this location, as it's an area from going from industrial to residential. And I do agree that that whole corner then should be treated the same, including the parcel that's zoned I-1 right now.
Council, any thoughts on that? Pierre, did I see your hand?
No.
Yeah, go ahead.
So my question is it simpler to designate it I-1 to begin with and entertain opportunities? Or how do we do something simple, but then suggest that you could look at split zoning, so the southern portion of the lot could be, you know, I-1, and the northern portion could be something more creative? What's the simplest way forward? And then also, how do we address Mr. Whitaker's concern for the buffer that's on the eastern side of his property?
Well, I believe if we're going to, in a direction that we're going to allow, we're going to look for a mixed-use zone in this area, then the buffer may not be needed because the future, once these lots are redeveloped, the residents there, they're going to be buying into a mixed-use development.
Yeah, the buffers on these properties were established, as Mr. Whitaker intimated, at a time when it was predominantly envisioned as an industrial park. So it was to, make sure that the residential properties aren't impacted by overt industrial activity that might go on the park. The park's morphed more into a light industrial / commercial business park for the most part. The buffers are still, I think, important, but there may be other ways to create that buffering, the fundamental aspects of buffering without simply a tree buffer. It could be a staged zoning, or a graduated zoning, or a mixed-use development that buffers the residential areas to the north to the more intense commercial and light industrial aspects of the business park in and around that corner. And in theory, it could encompass the entirety of that, not just either side, but at this point, we're just talking about the portions west of Queensway, south of Aspen / And I just want to make sure Mr. Whitaker's, following where the conversation is going. You're following? I'll just let Councillor Reyes go and then.
Okay. There is a buffer, a natural buffer right there. There's a sewer line in there that I think was put in without a...
So that's still a green area on site.
So I think there's two issues here. One is this north-south buffer along the edge of Mr. Whitaker's property. And reading the material, the intent seems to be that buffer would remain there as long as the Whitaker property and those adjacent properties are residential. So the only question I have about that, and maybe it's just a mapping thing, is it appears to be a 20-meter buffer that straddles the property lines, in other words, 10 meters on either side. And I'm not sure if that's just the way the sketch is done, but I think it's simple enough, just the way we've got them along the top of the next Aspen Road, just to maintain that there for as long as those properties are continuing to be residential. And if they do rezone and redevelop, then that buffer could come off, because then it will be some other zoning that fits it. So that's one issue. So I think we can protect some buffer along there. The second issue is the top part, going along the top, along the Aspen Road line, and more or less the line of trees going right across to practically the railroad tracks, and in the transition between the business park and all the residential areas to the north. I think that's a second issue. And while you wouldn't necessarily have it all trees, there's parts of it, Aspen Road, for example, is intended to be landscaped, or it was at one time. But if we're looking for something like a quick fix, the only thing I could suggest is some kind of a quick modification of the C10 zoning or something like that. If you want a placeholder to prevent it being something else, which is more or less the zoning for the area down the bottom of 2nd Avenue, mixed commercial, residential, and so forth, to provide a transition between what the mayor referred to as possibly more industrial type uses to the south and the residential development to the north. Your property will stay the way it is as long as you choose to leave it that way, or the next owner chooses to leave it that way. So it doesn't change the existing use. the zoning changes grandfathered. So it's only, we're talking now about what might come if that property is ever redeveloped. But the buffer part, I think, can be maintained against that lot there. It seems to have been the intent of everything, and that's just something we keep in mind or put in place with, I'm not sure how we put it in place, but I think it can, and the question I have is whether it's 10 meters on either side or whether it's 20 meters on one side or the other.
If you don't have the answer now, we can certainly dig.
Yeah, and I don't want to put you on the spot. No.
Okay. It appears to me that it's wholly located on that other parcel.
It's not clear from the sketch here.
It is
The
not.
line that runs right sort of.
Yeah, so if we could get clarity on that. So my understanding is, from Mr. Whitaker's point of view, and let me know if I'm putting words in your mouth, is that you're concerned if that your property where you live now, it's residentially currently, and someone develops that corner, you'll have no buffer. Is that correct? And so that, I think that's sort of one aspect is how do we, the residences that are now, they don't have to change, they're going to live there as long as they want to live there. How do we, preserve the intent of the natural tree buffer while residential uses are currently grandfathered there, people are living there? So that's one issue. I think the next issue is how do we envision this corner in the long term? Is this purely residential? Is this mixed use? We want to make sure we're allowing for employment on these lands, but we're interested in creating some added value through residential. So we're creating more of a mixed use in that node, and I think that's sort of another conversation. What I'm hearing from council is we don't necessarily, and correct me if I'm wrong, because I haven't heard from every council, but we don't necessarily think it should be all residential. So just a whole bunch of townhomes in that corner of the business park area. Am I generally hearing that? Am I generally hearing that, and we're talking vision, we're not talking what's there today, vision. Am I generally hearing that both the piece that's zoned industrial on the west side of Queensway and those 4 lots, or I think there's a little mini lot or something there, 5 lots.
There's 5 lots.
Yeah.
There's 5 lots essentially here.
5 lots there. So those 5 lots in perpetuity as a way to buffer the residential area to the north and sort of have that, what's the word I'm looking for? Transition from the business park to the residential area, that would we be interested in the long-term vision there being mixed use. So there'd be some commercial / like industrial, almost a la end of 2nd, 3rd Avenue, C10 zoning that allows for that mixed use of residential and purpose-built commercial light industrial. Is that generally what I'm hearing from council? Okay. Yeah, go ahead.
So on that, just thinking about this, and I'm looking at the residential going through here, and we don't really have an active transportation route, like we have the Queensway bike path, but keeping a buffer zone outside that property and coming right through that edge might be a good way to take people off the road and eventually have a pathway, not like keep it as a buffer zone while it's still residential, and then keep it maybe as a pathway that connects areas and allows for active transportation through there. It's just an option, and it's future thoughts. But I'm just looking at Philly zoning code changes, and RC10 zoning and the zoning.
Sorry, who's Philly?
Philadelphia.
Oh.
Mistake. But they just did an industrial rezone. They are going through the same struggles with this sort of transition area with residences and people wanting to build on top of industrial land. And so they have an IRMX zoning, and we currently do not have, RC10 zoning is inadequate. It doesn't really capture the weirdness, I hate to say, but like what people desire as far as employment and artisan, like bread. Or water, yeah. But it includes non-residential uses, incentivize artisan or light industrial uses, reduces the maximum lot coverage, ease parking and loading regulations. I'll send this article out, but basically to have a mixed density industrial use that still is respectful of residences and has a transition area but sort of captures what the public was saying about Second Avenue, and maybe make that zoning inclusive. I think it's something that should be really maybe brought to a committee to discuss, like the C10 zoning, how we can make that into something that actually adequately represents what the community is looking for.
I don't think we're going to get to the bottom of it today, but I
Yeah.
think what I'm hearing from council is we want to make sure that we're leaving our options open to make sure we can develop this vision for this area without all of a sudden having 500 residential, only high-density developments, for example. So, Jens?
So I just wanted to go back to the initial, my initial message, which was there's a level of urgency here that if we don't do something now, literally, that we will see duplexes there. Well, townhomes are not permitted in the current zone.
Oh, it's ours, right.
Yes.
Okay, go ahead, Karen.
So that's what I was asking, is the simplest thing to do to put an I-1 zoning on it and then bring it to committee and look at fixing what we actually intend there, or leave it to the opportunity landowner to actually then upzone it to something else. The simplest fix might be to just put I-1 there and then look at ways to protect that buffer, as Councillor Race was saying, between the Whitaker property and that lot on the corner.
That would be the simplest way.
Yeah, and it seems that the actual zoning actually does involve the lot line there too, because the lot beside Mr. Whitaker's does this weird
Yes.
dot
Yeah,
line.
there's a bit of fixing there.
Yes, I believe that's the intent. And so if we can figure out a way to firm up the buffer to protect the existing residential, the intent of what was happening, so that the existing people living in that area have the buffer that was intended, and then step the zoning to I-something.
I-1.
So that we can go through a bit of a planning process around this area, include the residents and people in the business park in that planning process. Is that sort of where we're thinking?
Yes. So in the short term, we would rezone it to I-1. And then through that I-1 rezoning, we could include a site-specific condition for a setback in a buffer area on that one property.
Just to codify what's in the OCP.
Exactly.
In the zoning bylaw, so it's
Yes.
clear.
And then that would give us breathing room to figure out what's best, whether it's the district does that or a developer comes forward and proposes something.
Yep, Doug.
Yeah, so I was going to prepare a motion, or move rather, just the I-1 zoning, and I was going to treat them actually as two separate issues with the buffer and have a second motion related to the buffer.
Okay.
My thought was that to have staff bring back some options with respect to that buffer, because I understand some of the uncertainties around that. But as far as the I-1 zoning goes, for the placeholder, for whatever the descriptions of those lots are that are presently RM2, is it? RS2. To move that those be rezoned to I-1 and staff to bring back the bylaw.
Amendments to the.
We have prepared a draft motion.
You have a draft motion?
I can read it out. I did tweak it slightly.
Okay.
Perfect, go ahead.
Through the chair, is that?
Yes.
Okay. That staff prepare amendments to district's OCP, redesignating all 5 residentially zoned properties located between the west end of Pioneer Way and Government Road in the Sea to Sky Business Park area from residential neighbourhoods to employment industrial land designations. That's number 1. And the second one is, and staff prepare amendments to the district's zoning bylaw, rezoning all 5 residentially zoned properties located between the west end of Pioneer Way and Government Road in the Sea to Sky Business Park area from residential to RS2 to an appropriate mixed-use or industrial transitional zone or zones, and which accommodate the landscape buffers outlined in the business park sub-area plan. That gives us a bit of flexibility to bring back an I-1, something else, deal with the buffers.
But it acts as a placeholder.
Yeah.
So this isn't actually a motion, just to clarify, this isn't a motion to rezone. Council's directing staff to prepare something for council to consider in the future.
So basically, you're going to rezone my property I-1?
Currently, the intent is that staff bring back that motion But the intent is, and maybe Gary, can you read the second part?
Yes,
Because really what we want to do is go through a planning process there, so we're figuring out this sort of mixed-use zone, residential and employment lands zone in that area.
You're destroying me at 76 years old.
Well, I'm not sure we are, but we can chat about it. But Gary, can you just clarify that one part of the motion?
Yeah, we haven't settled on a zone, but it would be a rezoning to a district or a zone that has, it's either industrial or would accommodate industrial or commercial and residential. But it would get the buffer so that you're guaranteed that buffer until there is redevelopment. So, but we are talking about a rezone, yes.
How many times do we revisit this?
And we are including that lot to our lot
Yes.
in that whole process. So this isn't actually, this is a committee meeting, and it's just directing staff to bring something back for council to consider, and all this goes to the public for comment, review, engagement. This is essentially starting the process, but it's not the finalization of the process. This is just the beginning of the process. And there's no guarantees what the end result of the process may or may not be. So is that what you're moving, Councillor Rice?
Motion.
Is there a second? There's a second by Councillor Chappelle. And wondering maybe if staff could take some time to sit down with Mr. Whitaker to just clearly articulate
Absolutely.
and understand what his intentions are too, so that would be
Yes.
great. I'll call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. We take a 5-minute break. Welcome back everyone to the committee of the whole meeting of January 17th, and we're meeting today in the traditional territory of the Squamish Nation. We are on item 4.4, Woodfibre LNG tax negotiation proposal for a consultant, and our CAO is not here unfortunately. She's not feeling well, but maybe Mr. Buxton can help us out.
Thank you, Mayor and Council. I'll try and cover on the Woodfibre LNG tax negotiation. We're looking today to get Council's approval to pursue tax negotiations through a sole source contract. So sole sourcing requires Council's approval. Recent announcement, Woodfibre's proceeding. They will be starting work shortly. Work on the facility itself, as we've been informed, will start next year, which means that the issues of assessment and taxation are upon us, as Council has previously discussed. We don't have a lot of information or a lot of background. There's not a lot of precedent on which to base assessment and taxation decisions. We don't have a lot of information. Traditional assessment is therefore tricky. Even the province is having issues dealing with that. And they are indicating that a preference, it's not direction, but a preference that municipalities enter into agreements, negotiated agreements to provide certainty both to the applicants and municipalities. In exchange for that certainty, the agreement should ensure that we get adequate benefit to provide that certainty. And that requires sort of a certain level of understanding and expertise that we think would be best sourced through getting some external expertise. Ms. Glenday has spoken with others that have done this, particularly Port Edwards. That led us to recommendations to engage heuristic consulting and the two principals there. I won't go through the details of their CVs or their resumes. Suffice to say that we need a budget of around 30,000 plus travel expenses to engage in that process. And I think given the timeliness, we do need to sort of start to do some work on an agreement. So getting these resources on side in 2017 would be useful for Ms. Glenday and the senior leadership team. So that really is the short summary of wanting to get Council's approval to move on this sooner rather than later.
So just to frame the decisions in front of Council, one is whether we proceed with negotiating a tax regime or deal with Woodfibre or whether we don't at this point. Is this, the timing is right, is the timing right now or not? Certainly prior to WLNG's announcement publicly that they had made a final investment decision, I understood there to be a bit of an imperative. It'd be interesting if it's changed now. From their point of view, from our point of view, do we have enough information on assessments to proceed now or not? So that's just sort of one side of it. Do we want to proceed or not right now? Is this something that could wait 6 months or a year or not? Two, if we think we have to budget somehow for it in this year, do we sole source it, which is essentially, my understanding is through some investigation by the CAO and staff that these are the consultants that, and through the Port Edward experience, these are the consultants that have the expertise in this, but we don't have to sole source, so that's a decision of councils as well. And then thirdly, do we budget for it or how do we pay for this? So sort of three aspects of the discussion, but Councillor Liz.
Thank you. With respect, I thought we had already made the decision to start discussing a tax agreement. I don't think, and I don't see that as part of the material in front of us. I think we are past that decision. What's here is it's directing the CAO to lead it and get the sole source consulting contract. So I think we have made that decision, frankly, and I wasn't thinking about it as part of the discussion today. My thoughts on this were, first of all, around this, well, I'll step back a bit. On some levels, this might be quite simple, but I think in this particular case, because of the political interest or the interest in the community with respect to this particular project, it is absolutely worthwhile to do a lot of looking around at other communities so that we end up with whatever solution we have as a robust solution. And so for that reason, I am in favor of hiring a consultant. I think that's one of the decisions whether we go to a consultant at all. Secondly, this is probably one of the narrower, if not the narrowest niches of municipal finance that we might find. So I can understand trying to sole source. These types of agreements aren't even common in British Columbia, let alone anywhere else. So I can understand there being very little expertise in this particular area. But my final point is, so I think it is a good idea to do this, is I think Woodfibre should be prepared to pay for this. And I'll say that just as everybody knows, I've been a supporter of this project, and so I'm not trying to hit back at them in any way. I think this is a matter of principle. And we look at, for example, the planning department. We have a business as usual, and people can put a zoning application in and kind of wait their turn in the lineup. But if a large project comes in and requires or wants to have a speedier process, they fund a planner. And so I think this is the same way. For municipal taxation, we have business as usual. This is something requested by the proponent that is, in my mind, above and beyond business as usual. And so I think it is quite fair to us to ask them to fund this particular consultant, which is, and any other costs, frankly, if we have legal costs or anything else associated with this agreement within reason. I think this should be the obligation of the proponent.
Thank you. I agree with many of Doug's points. I think it's a really important negotiation. However, when I'm thinking about taxation rates, I think about financial models and I think about financial ratio analysis in other communities, and industry isn't new to communities. Tax rates are not new to communities, and that ratio analysis that goes along with understanding how much money that you're taking in taxation versus a BC assessment versus what is reputational capital money that you're just asking for something to come into your community. Taxation is meant to cover your resources, and if this was in our town, and it will be taking up things like our roads coming up here, but the municipal aspect of it, as far as the resources that are being used.
Let's not get into
No, but those are simple things that you can figure out by looking at numbers. And to me, when numbers come in, I want to be able to look at the numbers and have it make sense to me. And I don't want to just ask for extra money for the sake of it being a controversial project. I want it to make sense in the taxation arena. And for me, that model is everywhere. It's not that LNG is any different model. It's actually a very small compressor station compared to other areas. But I'm interested in, if they wanted a negotiation sooner rather than later, and they want it to be pushed, I do agree with Councillor Race's point of having the proponent pay in order to secure a rate. If I was the proponent, I would want to be able to choose my own. If I was paying for something, I'd want to be able to choose my own consultants. That is the only discrepancy that I see. I wouldn't want the municipality to provide people that were going to negotiate my tax rate. I would want, and then either way, the facts will be exactly the same. They'll be basing it on analysis of land use, resources used in the community, previous tax rate assessment, which was $2 million. Woodfibre was a lot, when Woodfibre
Well,
was
let's not get into the details of
Let me
that. That is
finish.
completely separate. We're not
Exactly.
going to
I am
negotiate
making the
this
point
right
of-
now. We're trying to understand if we need a consultant or
I thought I had
not.
the floor, sorry.
Well, I'm interrupting you.
Yes, I know.
So we can't get into the debate about the details of the negotiation. at
I'm
this
just
point.
saying it's simple, and do I want, if it's something to be paid for by the taxpayer, I am not in favor. If it's paid for by the proponent because they want to quicken the process, I'd be happy to support this. That's basically what I'm saying, but it's, either way, it should be just a simple financial analysis.
Councillor Blackman Wolf, Councillor Kent.
Yeah, initially when I first saw this, I wasn't too keen on the district spending money on a consultant, but now that I've heard the suggestion from Councillor Race, I think I'm inclined to go in the direction he is suggesting, with the proponent paying it, but with us choosing the consultant. And I think that it's in both the district's interest as well as the applicant's interest for us to start these negotiations now rather than later.
Thanks. Peter.
I agree with Doug. I think that the proponent should pay. It's pretty, I don't think it's cut and dried. I think it's a fairly convoluted process, and there are some existing models, but I think that we need somebody with some expertise. And from what I've read through the report, the gentleman who formed this company, Hydroelectric Consulting, seemed to have some substantial background in jobs like this. So I think it's a good choice for us to have somebody like this on our team. And I would definitely be seeing the proponent, Woodfibre.
So just to play a bit of devil's advocate, like Doug, I thought there was agreement that we needed a tax agreement in order to secure, for the proponent to secure a final investment decision. But they went ahead and did that, which can suggest that, municipal taxes aren't really playing into that final investment decision because it's been made. And so it feels like it takes the heat off a little bit from my perspective. And so, the environmental assessment process is about to be reopened because they've changed a very important component, which is going from seawater cooling to air cooling, and so that impacts some of the value components. That also is more expensive to build, which will impact their assessment. We are quite far away from having initial engineering drawings, so actually being able to determine, the numbers, what the capital improvements will be on site. So I'm just, I'm trying to understand the urgency to sole source. In fact, I agree that someone else should pay for it, or the proponent should pay for it. But what is? I don't really understand the urgency at this point. They've made their final investment decision. We seem to have a bit of time. Let it go through its renewed environmental, assessment process. The Squamish Nation was quite upset that final investment decision was made in advance of them finishing their process. So I don't want to get too far ahead of that other government as well. I mean, there's lots of things to take into account. And yeah, these people seem really qualified, but, there might be other people out there. So So I'm just, so I guess my question is do we actually have a sense of urgency around this at this point? I mean, I get that we need to do it, but we have a lot going on. We have an OCP to finish. We have a lot to do in the first half of this year. And so is there any risk in waiting? I don't think the company's waiting for us, so they're moving forward. So anyway, I just have lots of questions. I don't necessarily have the answers. I just.
Yeah, good conversation, interesting thoughts. I think just to address a little bit more specifically, council did give direction to staff to move around this. It was prior to any final investment decision by the proponent. It was prior to the reopening of that one aspect of the environmental assessment process. I think what we need to do now, and I'm going to look to our Director of Finance to clarify this, in order to assume that at some point during 2017, it's still weird to say that, 2017, we may have to engage a consultant. It may be this week, it might be next week, it might be in 3 months from now. If we put in the budget, but don't tax for that amount, and basically say we're funding it through a grant from the developer, the proponent, then we can do that. And it won't impact the tax base. It keeps our financial plan open to act on it down the road should WLNG fund the consultant. Correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Yeah, so that's one option open for council, is that we don't necessarily sole source this now, but we make sure we put it in the budget so we can react to it should we need to, but not tax for it. That make sense? I think, just to reiterate what Councillor Ray said, this is not business as usual. If it was business as usual, they would build their building, it would be assessed, we'd set a mill rate, bada bing, bada bang, it would be done. This is something altogether different, and it was just business as usual. We wouldn't need, as Councillor Chappelle said, we wouldn't need that extra expertise to help sort of make sure we're doing our due diligence for our taxpayers. So, and I would not agree with the proponent choosing the consultant. They're working for us. They're not working for the consultant. So they have to be negotiating on our behalf, not on the consultants, not on the developer's behalf. So, and I have not heard directly from I gather staff have had sort of these wink and nudge conversations with the province saying, we'd like you to do some sort of negotiated tax deal. They've never said anything to me. They've never said anything directly to council. I know some councillors have had off-hand conversations with a variety of either the proponent or the MLA sort of insinuating the same, but we haven't actually heard anything formal. And maybe I know there's an employee of the proponent here, and maybe we can just through John say if WLNG, like, it would be good to hear this directly from your WLNG that this is actually what they want to do or not want to do, and from the province to say this is, it's all been sort of innuendo at this point and not actual direct, we would really like you to move in this direction. So, so anyway, that's my diatribe.
That's very good diatribe. Thank you.
I'm glad you didn't say diarrhea.
This time. Yeah, and I would agree with Councillor Elliott as well, where it's there's a lot of things coming forward, and I don't feel the urgency like before when we were in the financial committee, where it seemed dire to understand how much we were bringing in with the investment decision. I feel less inclined, and the environmental assessment, and how big the footprint's going to be with the new cooling. I think it's a little early to be negotiating taxes and a new government, which may change taxation for industry anyways. So I think it'd be prudent to hold off, and I agree single sourcing may be not the best way to go for our taxing public. So.
Yeah, go ahead.
The one thing that concerns me is that, and although Gary did a very good job presenting the information, is that our CEO, who's the one who's had these conversations, is not here today to speak directly to them. And she may have learned a reason about why this is important to do now, or today, and we won't have the benefit of that. So I also don't want to make a decision without knowing all the facts. If she's learned something through her conversations with these two individuals, that might actually influence my decision in a different direction. So I'm feeling a little bit wary that I might not have all the information at my disposal at this time.
So maybe what we do now is ensure that this amount of money, I guess 32,800 or 33, is in the financial plan and allocated to, not allocated to the tax requisition, but allocated to some granting. So if the money comes in, we have the opportunity to move forward. It's in the financial plan, we don't have to amend the financial plan to do it. And then I agree, I think it would be good to have the CA here to speak specifically about the expertise of this sole source versus if we did open it up, would we just get one person, because they're the only guys who've done this in the province. I just don't know that. I'm not sure staff knows that, so maybe we won't actually determine that. And maybe we don't need to. Maybe we wait until the environmental assessment process is the new piece opened and closed, and Woodfibre has a better understanding of what that may or may not cost them. So maybe we don't need to actually make the decision to actually sole source today. That makes sense, and the CAO can bring that conversation back as needed.
We do have information on the sole source piece, but I think if there's some question as to whether you want to proceed with the agreement, then that definitely should be held.
I don't think there's any urgency this week, or maybe next week, but right in this meeting, I'm not sure I see the urgency unless someone disagrees with me there. So, Ms. Matthews, is it currently in the budget?
So, thank you, Mayor Heinzman. We actually have an economic development project in the budget right now, which we have essentially made sure has enough funds to cover this. So I guess a key question to you is when we bring the budget back on the 23rd, do you want any residual left back for the economic development project as a standard budget, or do we take it all out and just put this in with the contribution?
I would almost like to make a separate line item for this and allocate it to grant, whatever.
We will do that, yes. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you. But our last budget meeting, there was a slide up there that I don't know, 4 or 5 points on it, and we talked about number 1. Number 2 was something to do with Woodfibre LNG, and I thought it was this, and we never, for different reasons, never got around to talking about it. So when I saw this, I guessed that that's what it was we were about to talk to. But was there some other source of funds that you were thinking of, or some other entry? Was that what this was?
So just to explain the point, we actually had an economic development officer that we're hoping to hire in. We don't really have any special project funds for them to work with because we were looking to use the amount we were going to give.
Why don't we take that budget discussion to next week's budget meeting, if that's all right, Councillor Race, just so we don't go in the rabbit hole. And I think if we can separate out a separate line item, allocate it to granting. It's very contingent on whether or not we get the monies from outside sources to move forward with that.
Okay. And we'll leave an economic development budget in there as well.
Yes.
Great.
Do you need a motion to that effect, or is that just going to come back?
A motion's helpful, for sure.
Move that a separate line item for WLNG tax negotiation be put in the budget to be funded through other granting donation sources, whatever that designation is.
Great,
In the amount of 35,000? Let's go round it off.
Sure, if you want to round it up to 35, yeah. Seconded by Councillor Blackman-Wolf. Call the question, all those in favor? Opposed, motion carries. And look at that, we are still on time except we added a budget item. We're on to item 5.1, Children's Charter. Putting children first.
We have some special guests.
We got some children
that are coming.
Hey.
So a warm fuzzy to finish here.
Welcome everybody.
Troops. Tough act to follow.
Do you want to come up and sit at the table?
want to come sit here?
Someone can back. There's a chair over here.
How many are there, Sarah? Pass all around. Sarah can have one for
Hey guys. So, maybe I'll just pass it over to Mr. Janet. This was something council directed a while ago, and just from reading the report, it sounds like it was a pretty fun, engaging process to get us here, and really welcome and thank the kids for participating in that.
Sure, thank you. So Sarah McJanet, I'm with Community Planning, and as the Mayor highlighted, we're bringing forward the completed Children's Charter for Council endorsement and integration in our community plan and beyond. Here with me are Julie Van Eastern, the Early Years Coordinator, and Susie Soman, who's the Director for the Early Childhood Development Services.
That was a gay grandma.
Yeah.
There's always somebody who's trying to upstage you.
Always, for sure. So Julie and Susie are going to present the Children's Charter development process, the charter itself, and implementation activities. But before they do, we wanted to acknowledge funding partners for this work, including Vancouver Coastal Health, the United Way, and the many collaborators on this project. So the Putting Children's First Initiative and Early Years Table, which includes Sea to Sky Community Services, the Early Years Center, Vancouver Coastal Health, School District 48, all were involved. I played a very minor supporting role and put it out there, and these wonderful people just took it and ran with it, and made it their own, which is amazing. The effort lasted 13 months, and it followed council's motion to embed the early childhood lens in our policy, and also specifically to bring back a children's charter, which many communities do as a first step. So we've been working hard to put age-friendly policies in the community plan, as you know. And the charter is really a first step to acknowledge and bring awareness to children's rights. And by endorsing the charter, we are confirming a commitment to inclusion of children and youth to support well-being and their unique needs in all of our community plans and policies and processes. And it's really a collective effort, and so we're looking forward to working with all levels of government and health providers, Board of Education, businesses, and all the community agencies. So I'm going to turn it over to Julie.
Thank you very much, Sarah. Thank you, everyone. The Children's Charter of Rights. Many Children's Charter of Rights have been created in many communities, places like Richmond, New Westminster, Surrey, Tri-Cities, and the North Shore already have their children's charters in place. And the Children's Charter of Rights is based on the historic UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And Squamish's Children's Charter was created using the voices of the children. We went out to all the schools, and we felt that this opportunity was just a great way to create a document, because we really, really, truly believe that we want Squamish to be the best place to raise a child and the best place to be a child. So we had Aaron Stewart Elliott create this graphic record of the process that we've been going through in the last 13 months. And so the action group was formed, and so you have it all in front of you. And we will leave this graphic record in the lobby so other people can come and check it out. So we created the action group. The action group wrote a proposal, and then we got some wonderful funding from the United Way and Vancouver Coastal Health. They all thought this was also a really great idea. And once that happened, we kind of reached out to all the schools. And we said, hey, we want to do this, are you in? And we had great response, lots of teachers who were already teaching the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child and thought this was a great way to progress it. So we created all these boxes and put them in all the schools. And we also gave all the teachers in every school 3 books so they could talk to the kids about their rights. And so that it got the kids thinking about, okay, what is my right? And what do I feel that, I should not necessarily be entitled to, but what should be my basic needs as a child in my community? And so we then had the children, gave the teachers these books and packages and gave them bookmarks and papers, and we got artwork from so many kids. So we have a box here full of children's artwork about what they feel is their rights.
So just checking, Kelsey, can you still hear even though she's standing? Okay, you're good.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
And then, so we gathered all their artwork together and we went through it all, and we compiled what we felt were the main, most consistent themes in their artwork, and we came up with 28 kind of rights. And so then we put them on this sheet and we gave it back to every classroom and asked the teachers to get the children to vote on their top 15. So then we collected all of those votes, and just for an example of how many children participated, in School District 48, from K to 6, there are approximately 1,428 students. We got 753 votes.
Phenomenal.
Yeah, so 753 children voted on what they felt their rights were in our community.
Our kids rock.
Yeah,
They do.
yeah.
They really do.
That does include Montessori and Delegation also participated, but I don't know how many students. So it's more than 1,400 students in the community, but we did get 753 votes.
And that's from all ages?
From K to 6.
But the whole spectrum of the elementary school?
Yeah.
Fantastic.
And then, so then we're all the way down over to collecting all the ideas from the children and sorting them into categories, going to the vote cards. And then we took this information and we compiled 11 rights that we felt the kids, that summed up the 15 that were the most popular of what the children. And from there, we are creating the document. We're hoping to create 2x3 wrapped canvases documents, which we will have.
We have a sample, but it's not super great.
Yeah, still.
But we're going to pass it around just so you get an idea.
And the other thing we did was create a video. And we are going to show you that video right now.
1 minute.
I like that we already have really opinioused kids.
Yes.
Right.
And one of you might recognize somebody in the video once you see the video. Few of them.
Two.
Yes, two.
Of course, now I had it all queued up.
Phenomenal job, buddy.
Jonas
This
broke it.
is very, very cool.
It's been a great collaboration with everyone involved. It's still a girl in the movie.
I cannot, sorry, bear with me. Oh, there we go.
These are beautiful books.
Julie sourced those out actually for us last year, and I think we were going to put some in the library, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, every school has them now. Okay, here we go. So it's on our website, Kids.
job, guys.
So awesome.
We got some stars. Wow, that was amazing. So we're gonna get that on our website, I'm assuming.
I hope so, yeah. So yeah, that was my next point, was I'm hoping that then this video will be on our Sea to Sky Community Services website, our Sea to Sky Kids website, School District 48, Vancouver Coastal Health, District of Squamish, just to commemorate that we've created this wonderful charter for our kids in our community. And then like I said, we're creating plaques, and we're going to have one in every school. We hope to have one here at Municipal Hall, one in the library, the rec center, anywhere that family and children meet, go to, congregate, like it's so that everyone has an opportunity to view their rights in our community. Also, with the children's artwork, we are going to be we want to create resource boxes for all the teachers so that they can start teaching their rights to the children and have it in the library and use it as a curriculum resource box. And with the children, oh, it's in my house. This is just a mock-up, but we're going to be creating a book, and for each right, actually using some of the artwork that we collected from the children. And I guess finally, I just want to say that by endorsing this charter and integrating it into Squamish's official community plan, we are ensuring that our municipal government uses these rights as a lens when making decisions for our community.
Absolutely. That's not often I want to clap. When we get a presentation, but that's fantastic. I think just the way you guys went about this with the inclusivity and the engagement and the collaboration just really sets the bar high, and you've done a phenomenal job. I do want to open up the floor to some questions if council have any specific questions on the charter itself. I don't see any, but oops. But perhaps if council would like to say a few words, I'm totally open to that. Councillor Kennedy.
Wonderful piece of work. It's phenomenal. And I love the idea of leaving this out, and I think using the kids' own drawings as a teaching tool later on is a fabulous idea. Well done. Thank you.
Thank you. I love the use of social media and that you put it on YouTube. I mean, this is, I think, healthy communities and kids' charters, and just making sure that everybody is engaged in the OCP. And Sarah, I just thank you. And
thank you to Sarah.
And thank you to Susie for raising my children.
And now children and grandchildren.
Yeah, Karen.
So maybe a question for Sarah, because I know you're working on the OCP, but you know, how do we make sure that when developers are planning, you know, plan neighborhoods, multifamily developments, how do we make sure that this is in front of them, that at their pre-planning meetings we get to play them the video, you know, that they understand that this is a lens through that our planners are looking at their plans with, that council will look at, and that the community will be evaluating their plans on as well. So how do we keep this sort of front of mind, that it doesn't sort of, in the, you know, coming years get shuffled to the back?
Yeah, this is about mindfulness and application and.
Yeah, it's not just a nice project, but if we want it applied to how architects and developers are thinking about our community.
And how politicians and staff in the future as well, and all community builders.
So I've given that a lot of thought as I'm working with the OCP. So the Children's Charter rights statements will be highlighted sort of in their entirety in the OCP, but in terms of how they're being applied to specific policy and guidelines, it's what we're wanting to do is embed it throughout the plan, but through healthy built environment focus and family-friendly housing. We've already got policy drafted following on the footsteps of, for example, cities like New Westminster that have, you know, devote a certain percentage of new units to 2- and 3-bedroom units that are suitable for family. We've got policies around quality, affordable, and accessible childcare. policy focused in on accessibility for all, including, the 8 months, 8 days to 80 years old, in terms of in natural environment access, places for play, and also a focus around ways that we can address the early childhood vulnerabilities as well, because that was a key impetus, I think, for the whole ECD focus through the healthy community work as well. So in a myriad of ways, we will be applying both policy, but then development permit area guidelines. We haven't thought about like checklists or something like that, but I think it will be very front and center, and it's all sort of housed under that sort of healthy and inclusive, those key goals for the OCP.
Can I just follow up just quickly? We adopted a food charter, and our community has rallied behind that. We've got $50,000 in grant money and are running with it to help inform our OCP. We endorsed the idea of a children's charter, and our community embraced that and ran with it, and has produced something so wonderful. And I just, it reminds me that not all the great ideas live inside these walls,
No.
and that when we can empower our community, they do great things, and I'm very grateful.
Thanks, Councillor Reese.
Thank you. It struck me this is something for children, created by children significantly, and there's a bit of a governance lesson in there. They can be satisfied knowing that they are actually contributing to the legislation of this community through their own efforts, and hopefully that'll turn into a lifelong interest in governance and things that go on around them as far as politics and so forth, and participation in our democratic institutions. So it is a wonderful thing. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks. One thing I would like to make sure, it's great having a charter, but we had some pretty significant concerns in our community that were benchmarked already with our Healthy Communities Initiative on accessibility to services, on daycares, and I just want to make sure, it's great celebrating a charter, and I love the work, but we can't forget that there's work that needs to be done, and we have it benchmarked. I'd like to continue the benchmarking and make sure, and this is the perfect instance of an external group helping us with knowing where we're at and where we need to be. And so the rights are fantastic, and having this charter is amazing, but there's significant work to be done on making sure that our children have accessibility to public spaces, to health care, to food access, and there's a lot of work to be done. And I want to make sure that with this, we're not losing, here we are now, we have this charter, where are we going, where does this take us, and how does this charter increase engagement, increase access to public spaces, increase access to daycare, and how we move along with policy is so important to not, to still celebrate these small wins, but realize it on the grander scheme that the policy has to keep up with the charter. Otherwise it's...
This is the beginning.
Yes, this is the beginning, not...
This is some
Why we're doing.
foundational pieces, but this is not the end goal.
No. This is just the beginning.
Yeah.
We believe this is a living document, and as time goes on, everything that we do we'll look at with this lens, but then how can we make it better in our community, in all aspects of what you've just mentioned.
Thank you so much.
Wonderful. So there's a recommended motion that that the District of Squamish endorse the final draft of the Squamish Children's Charter as attached. Tell them what a wonderful job they did, and report from Community Planning and Infrastructure and integrated within the district's official community plan update. Moved by Councillor Chappelle, seconded by Councillor Race. All those in favor, opposed, motion carries. Awesome job. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having us.
Good job, guys.
CScan Kids.
So, why don't we take a 3-minute break just to clear the room, and then we have one more item we're going to we're back in the committee the whole meeting of January 17th. And we added a budget and utilities to the discussion. There's been a lot of conversation in the community with regard to sort of a slightly different way we're dealing with our utility bills this year. I want to give council, I want to give staff an opportunity to go through it with council and council an opportunity to make sure we're comfortable and up to date on everything. So I'll pass it over to Ms. Matthews.
Thank you, Mayor Heinzman. I really appreciate the opportunity. I know it's been probably a bit of a long weekend for some of us in terms of some of the correspondence that's gone out. We did send out a message on Thursday outlining some changes in our utilities around penalties and around tax penalties. I would like to just, one, make sure that everybody understands what we were doing and how the legislation applies, where it doesn't apply, just so that everyone's on the same page. I also do have to, frankly, wipe a little egg off my face in terms of, we had originally told you that we did not have a bylaw for 5 and 5 on our taxation. Our super sleuth Luce did find one today in the hard copy stacks. So it's from 18 years ago. Unfortunately, it was not on any of our onlines, so we did multiple searches. I can't give my staff a hard time because I also searched for it and was unable to find it, so I sincerely apologize. The beauty of that bylaw, we have had it past the lawyers. It would have been passed, it was passed under the Local Government Act back in 18 years ago. It's not a particularly wonderful bylaw, but we do consider it legal. We do consider it a grandfathering type scenario. It would not be legal under today's legislation because it is not in keeping with the only way that we cannot charge the legislated penalty today, which is through Section 235 under a municipal alternative solution. So we had, just to clarify around legislation, we are required under Section 234 normally to charge 10% penalty at July 2nd, okay? That is the law. There is a provision in the legislation that allows municipalities to employ an alternative, municipal alternative tax collection system. Anyone coming out of Vancouver would recognize that that is where we actually allow a taxpayer to elect for a different municipal taxation scheme, and that can be, for instance, in Vancouver, they allow you to pay half of your taxes in January and half of your taxes in July. It's a fairly extensive section. It can have some administrative issues to it because of elections, etc. So that is, I think someone had asked me over the weekend if we have an opportunity, that is where the provision we would use today to try and get that opportunity to go 5 and 5. So that's taxation. There's the utility side. We have, we are allowed, I had several people ask us, are we really allowed to charge a penalty? Are we allowed to charge a penalty mid-year? Are we allowed to charge interest? Yes, we are. We have had that confirmed by our lawyers. We are not offside by doing that. We are given authority under our legislation to charge interest, penalty, or discount, whatever we see fit, to collect utilities. So having said that, we get to choose that, okay? Back in about 2014, we changed from where we used to assess utilities in March, the flat fee utilities in March. Because that was ahead of July, where we charge penalty on taxation, we used a discount approach instead. So we basically raised everybody's fees, and we, for how much we would need to collect if no one took us up on the discount option. So everybody paid a higher fee, and if you paid by March, you got a 10% discount instead of a penalty. So kind of how we got around the fact that we were going to charge a penalty before July 4th. That is, again, a provincial standard. A lot of municipalities do that. When we chose to move the municipal utility payments onto the tax bill, my understanding to be more efficient, save some administrative costs, etc. The goal there was that we would bill once and we would collect once instead of billing twice and collecting twice. That was supposed to be an administrative efficiency. Unfortunately, when we moved the bylaws or the utilities from March to July, we didn't take a discount with us and we didn't take a penalty. And so even though it was always our intention that people would pay on July 4th when they were paying their taxes, people are wise. They catch on to the fact that they don't have to pay right now because there's no penalty to not pay. And more people started to go on at December 31st.
And that started about 2 years ago.
And that was about 2 years ago. So we went from under the discount, we were collecting about 73% of all of our utility collections in March, so even earlier in the year. And we have now dropped to July 4th, we're only collecting about 52% of all our collections. And the rest is being carried right to year end. So we're trying to fund all of our municipal operations for delivering utility services for an entire year with only half of our revenue coming in for that service. We consider that poor fiscal policy, and so does everybody across the province. We now, as far as we can find, are the only municipality that does not have interest, discount, or penalty on utilities until it rolls to taxes at December 31st. So we are not the norm anymore. We brought this back to you in November to talk to you about that, but I'm not gonna lie. I had my eye on that ball last year when we started realizing we had this problem in collections and issues, something we do plan to benchmark going forward. And we made sure that the tax bills said very specifically, taxes and utilities are due on receipt of this bill, okay? But we didn't have the bylaw and the hook to penalize. So when people came in and said, we'd like to keep our utilities, at December 31st, is there a problem with that? Staff had to outline that, well, our due date is now, but please understand, but we won't be moving that to taxes until December 31st. Please understand, we are looking at that. We will probably change that. So that's been some information around is, are we being fair with people? As of November, we came out and we discussed this with council. We were under the impression falsely then, and I apologize for this, that we had to go to 10% penalty on taxes. And what we're trying to do is align our utilities on that same bill so that it has the same penalty or interest scheme, because that administratively saves a lot of problems that we're running into by combining it on the same one but treating the balance differently. It's causing considerable havoc. On top of that, I do recognize that there is some concern around people having to pay a big lump sum at once. That decision essentially was made 2 or 3 years ago. If we want to change that, let's take that back to a finance committee for sure and talk about that more fulsomely, because we're about to enter into another software implementation project for 2018, and I really need to understand what we want to do with that to help set that, to make sure that system is set up properly and the way you want it, because we're going to do a lot of setup on those systems around that. We've already done the setup now to bring our utility bills onto one bill and treat them that way. I'm not sure if I've missed anything on all of this, except that I would be very happy to answer questions and clarify any issues where we might have misstepped or caused a problem. At this point, we could use this bylaw to go to 5 and 5, and the only thing that, if we're going to do that, rather than repeal the bylaw, what I would really like is that we go back, bring the utility bylaws back, and put them on 5 and 5 too, because all the way along here, our goal was to try and get everything treated the same, to make sure that when people collect, we can set up systems and automate things to work properly instead of having to do a bunch of manual move-arounds and fix and think things through. The other thing is that if you don't like everything being paid July 4th, and the mayor and I talked about this a little bit this morning, maybe the March penalized system was a better way to go or whatever, then we really need to consider that for both, or for the utilities again. I'm sorry, I just lost my thought, just like that. So I'm going to stop there. And the only other thing I just want to caution you about is that we currently also have a few people and a few accounts that are on monthly billing because they're metered, right? So with the metered billing, what we did was we put in a clause into the utility bylaws that said that we would go essentially net 30 on each monthly bill, and if you hadn't paid net 30, we would charge you 1.5% interest for that bill. And we had worked that all out so that essentially when the smoke cleared, they were still paying 10% if they chose not to pay all year. So if we are changing our schemes or penalty schemes or anything along that line, then we would want to maybe visit that, because our whole goal here is to keep it equitable. And I guess the last point is utilities, flat fee utilities, they're regulated, they're required. You have to pay them. They are essentially a tax. I hate to say it walks like a duck, it talks like a duck. It is a duck, it is a tax, and we do penalize taxes at July 4th or 2nd, depending on the day.
I wonder if you could just maybe clarify two things, and then I've got a few counselors. When we had the early payer system, just to articulate, in fact, really what it wasn't really a discount, because we create the calculation because we need a certain amount of revenue, so it's sort of presented as a discount because you get a benefit from going early, but...
Exactly. I mean, whether you discount something or penalize it, for a municipality, we still have to collect enough taxes to deal with either scenario. So when we discount, we essentially used to have a line item in each utility budget that was an expense for discounts, which meant that the rates had to go up and everyone had to get a higher bill so that we could pay and guess at what the discount rate would be. What we're saying is that with July, when we penalize, what it says is that we're going to tax everybody the same amount. So the 52% of our utility users right now pay on time on July 4th. But essentially, because they're paying on July 4th, but I'm prudent. I decide that my money's better in my bank account than the municipality's bank account. I choose to make interest till December. The problem is that now, as a municipality, we haven't been able to cash flow our operations. So we've either had to take down balances that would normally make us interest revenue, or we have to go out to the market and revenue finance that and pay more interest. That just became a bill for everybody in the municipality, right? Just means that our costs got higher. Now everybody's paying that, even though you paid on July 4th. So we consider that inequitable, frankly. Really, if we're choosing July 4th as the date when everyone has to pay, then anyone who doesn't pay after that contributes to us being able to offset the cost of whatever we had to borrow because we didn't collect their portion of the taxes.
I have that. You're good? Karen, Jason?
Yeah, just because you're using the term 5 and 5, and not everyone who's listening may understand what that means versus 10. So I was just going to ask for you to clarify that.
I will. Thank you. So thank you. If you'd like me to clarify that now. So what the bylaw that we have in place says is that we would tax 5%, or we'd charge a penalty the day after taxes are due, which by law is July 2nd. We will charge 5% instead of the 10% we're required to charge under the law. We have indicated we're going to allow people to pay 5% instead.
If they pay on July 5th, for example.
So say you forgot to pay, right? This kind of gives you a little bit of cushion that you get slammed with the 5%. And then on August 1st or 2nd, usually 2nd because we have a stat day, we actually assess another 5%, okay? The thing is, what we find is we have a 90% collection rates at July 4th or 2nd. It's normally 2nd. Sorry, I keep throwing two different dates out. So we have a 90% collection rate there. Between that and, that's right, between there and August, it's less than 2% collection because we don't have time to do notices or anything like that. So it really is just allowing that little bit of room for everybody to have that mistake. They missed it by a day or whatever. It gives them a little bit of cushion, but it really doesn't make it any easier for people to pay it. It doesn't spread it out or make it a half and half. It's a very small window of time.
And then on August 1st, it's the additional 5%.
It's the additional 5%.
Which is what is essentially governed under the community charter today, is that correct?
Well, the charter says 10% on July 2nd,
Yeah.
but it equates to 10%, yeah.
Equates to 10, okay. Councilor Blackwell.
Yeah, I'm in favor of us, looking towards to move to a system of twice-a-year payments. Like if we combine it all, utilities, and I agree with the sort of simplification for our processes, so to include utility and taxes in the same bill. But then I think we should be looking at going into the model that Vancouver has, which is twice-a-year payments. I think that would be helpful for people to manage.
For both utilities and taxes, or for utilities only?
For both.
Does Vancouver do two times a year taxes?
So they have the section, okay, so Vancouver is a different charter, so I'm not an authority on the Vancouver charter.
I'm not sure we can do what Vancouver did, but yeah.
But section 235 essentially allows us to do what Vancouver did. So we could actually put a bylaw on the floor that says this is the general taxation scheme, but we're going to ask you to do a municipal taxation scheme, and we're going to ask you to pay in installments or to pay once in January and once in July, half and half. The thing with that clause is the taxpayer has to elect to do that. Okay, so we now have administration around the election to do that, because we have to know if the taxpayer is going to elect to use the law or to use our bylaw, which is the municipal law.
And that's done on an individual basis?
Individual
You sign up or
basis
you
for
don't
each
sign up?
taxpayer, correct. Now, section 236 talks through what happens if they do or don't elect. So if they do elect, we have to use whatever they elect. If they're silent on the election, then it depends what's in our bylaw. If our bylaw says that we want you to pay earlier than the law requires, then if they don't elect, we have to treat them like the general tax, because that's the least penalizing to them, right?
Yeah.
If we just did a bylaw under that for penalties only and didn't do installments, then they could, and they don't elect, because it's actually doing 5 and 5 and it's actually a benefit to them, then the legislation says we would have to assume they elected for the municipal strategy instead. So you've just added another element of administration, potentially, unless it's just straight penalty 5 and 5, which would just automatically slip down into the municipal scheme.
So essentially,
Confused yet?
you'd have two sets of bills going out, you'd have two sets of times where people are coming in paying their bills.
Correct.
So there's an administrative cost to that.
There is.
Although in theory, there may be benefit to households trying to budget and plan for that.
And
I mean,
if
I think there's other ways to achieve that.
Thank you.
Through your mortgage, through whatever, but theoretically, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And that is probably a good point, and I can bring it up after if I'm on the
No, go
speaker's list.
ahead.
But I was just going to say that is a good point. I think just so that our ratepayers understand that there are a host of ways that you can do that yourself. I do it myself. I just choose to do it in my own savings accounts and stuff. But we put away money. We're disciplined. We put away money monthly, and then we draw it out and we pay the municipality. But you can actually you can set up with your bank to pay us monthly. There are other options for installments. And unfortunately, anytime we change the date or add that penalty, we're going to run into some people having to move to that new date. And I don't know that that's going to be any better, frankly, next year over this year. They're still going to feel that pain if they haven't done something like that.
We do have to start a meeting in 15 minutes, 14 minutes.
45 minutes, sorry. 45 minutes?
No, the meeting was supposed to start at, 4:15, and so I have until 1:45, but I don't like to leave it right to the last second, so. But I'm hoping to wrap this up. Any more questions for staff? So I guess our options are, we can keep what currently has been set up, and I think there's certainly a whole bunch of communication that needs to go along with that. Or we have this bylaw on record that is technically legal because it was done before the current charter, that allows us to do this sort of 1 month grace period, 5 and 5. I kind of like that idea, just because it does give the people, like, it seems a little bit
Takes the sting out.
Takes the sting out of people who might have been away or just forgot, oh my gosh, it's July 2nd. Takes a bit of the sting out of that. But the people who really are just planning to pay in December have the 10% as
Still going to be
always,
hit.
which was always the case until 2 years ago when we were sort of going through the shuffle and we didn't put an actual penalty on this. So anyway, thoughts, council, on that? Councillor Grace?
Yeah, no change obviously for this year, I don't think. I think we just have to carry on because we've already put it out there. I'd be happy with a discussion later in the year about next year, considering the option of somehow splitting it. And it may not be a really good option. As you say, there are other ways people can deal with it, but especially if they have a mortgage, because most banks will, in fact, they sometimes insist on it just to pay it. But unless history has changed, they don't do that with utilities, and so it might be easier. If it all gets lumped in together, they can just start dealing with it once again as one payment. So I think just to consider the options, I think it's significantly going to be an education piece for the people who are community and so they can plan ahead. Maybe some of them just really didn't plan ahead for this year.
So just to clarify, I don't think anyone's suggesting we don't go with the one-time payment. It's just a matter if the 10% penalty starts on July 5th, or we have a 1-month grace period.
And go 5 and 5.
And the 10% starts on August 1st or 2nd, or whatever that date is.
Maybe I misunderstood then. So you could do that this year with
Our bylaws actually.
One way or the
allow-
other, I have to either address the bylaw that we just found this morning and repeal it, which would put us back at 10%, or I need to go in and pull the 3 utility regulation bylaws and take them to 5 and 5 if we want to get the same scheme for both, which as staff we are begging you to do, please.
Yeah, no, I 100% like that. Yeah, I get that part.
So it's which way would you like us to go? Which bylaw are we bringing in to fix for you?
Yeah. Either way, we either have to repeal a bylaw or amend and change a bylaw.
Correct.
Because either way. Councillor Elliott.
I prefer the 5 and 5 to give people a bit of grace. People make mistakes, and we get most of it paid, and so I prefer to bring those bylaws back. And
Okay.
Same. I'm going to say 5 and 5 and give that.
Thanks, and I think that the issue here again was just basically public process and not really communicating well with the public. And, you know, I think that when people hear something change so drastically, all they can think of is I have to come up with more cash instead of, you know, how do I manage my cash, like you say, and, you know, explaining those options to people that they can defer, that they can set up payments on whatever communication channels that we're using, I think is critically important to the public understanding why these decisions are being made. So I appreciate your explanations, because I had the same questions as a lot of the public. As far as the bylaws are
We've definitely learned some lessons through this, so thank you and appreciate council's patience. We are having some more communications because it's going to hit, we hit social media now. Next week, as I understand it, it's going to hit the chief. If there's any feedback as to how we could message that better, please let us know. I'm sure Christina would love to know too. Obviously we want to make sure that we're messaging as effectively as possible. No one likes to pay taxes or penalties or utilities. There's probably no great way to tell people that, but we could have probably rethought 1 or 2 points of how we did that.
I think you did an excellent job of explaining and bringing us back, and yeah, I'm happy that this got addressed, so
Thank you.
I think staff will do an excellent job.
So just cognizant of time, I'm hearing general consensus to 5 and 5, keeping that bylaw, and we'll amend the bylaw that was brought to us a little while ago. So I guess the motion would be that staff bring back bylaws.
The utility bylaws to fix the penalties.
To incorporate the existing bylaw parameters of 5 and 5%. Is that helpful enough?
That is so helpful. Thank you very much, council. I appreciate it.
That's a motion moved by Councillor Ray, seconded by Councillor Elliott. I'll call the question. It was a really badly worded motion, but I think the intent is good. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you very much, everyone. Motion to terminate, moved by Councillor Elliott, seconded by Councillor Pryor. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries.